Phoenix Knights. Chapter 1079. While the 1st Cavalry Division was quickly assembling, the new army wasn't idle either. Commander Suhi was mobilizing the troops according to the plan, and he had basically completed it. At this moment, he was looking ahead, as if he could see through the distance of several miles and see the Japanese army's camp. In the past, Suhi and Tian Hu had competed for the position of commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. But later he gave up. Of course, at that time, the commander of the new army, Tiger's Mane, and the deputy commander were eager to let go of his talent. But more importantly, he himself understood that he was born as a surrendered general, and Tian Hu was the student of the 6th young master. He had already lost at the starting line. For a sharp blade like the 1st Cavalry Division, even the 6th young master, who had always been fair and just, would not easily hand it over to others. It was even more unlikely that he would hand it over to a fallen general like himself. After thinking things through, Suhi took the initiative to give up, and sure enough, he gained the favor of Yang Chendong, which was why he was now the commander of the new army. But without the current commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Suhi had always believed that it wasn't because he was inferior, but because of his background and environment. In order to prove himself, he had thought more than once about competing with Tian Hu. He wanted to use reality to tell everyone that he, Suhi, was not inferior to Tian Hu, and was even stronger than him. Today was an opportunity. The new army and the 1st Cavalry Division were attacking the two wings of the Japanese army. Although in terms of combat power, the 1st Cavalry Division was indeed much stronger than the new army, and even the first established new army was no match for it. But with the advantage of numbers, he might still have a chance. Commander Ke, inform everyone to be in their best condition. We want the enemy to unconsciously feel weak and afraid when they hear the name of the new army. Suhi called Kalu, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, and ordered. Yes, please rest assured. These days, everyone has been holding back their energy, Kalu said solemnly. In addition to being the vanguard in the first battle and capturing Tsushima Island, the new army rarely made any big moves, especially when facing the Japanese army in Changmen Prefecture. They had been watching the performance of the 3 foreign armies, and the brothers had been holding back. This was such a good opportunity to make a contribution, but they had no chance to participate. If the 1st Cavalry Division and the 1st Reserve Division weren't watching the show like them, some people would have expressed their dissatisfaction. Now that the opportunity had finally appeared, Kalu was of course very excited. It was said that a soldier who didn't want to be a general wasn't a good soldier, and the position of a division commander wasn't the end of Kalu's pursuit. He wanted to lead an army alone one day, or even more people to kill in all directions. Whether it was the 1st Cavalry Division or the new army, they were all ready to attack with all their strength. On the contrary, the 1st Reserve Division, who was in the middle of the attack, wasn't so excited. There was only one reason: they were infantry, and their speed couldn't catch up with the cavalry. The commander of the 1st Reserve Division, Tsukuda, had also fought his way up through the flames of war. He was a fierce general with both courage and wisdom. Yang Chendong had taken a liking to him and promoted him to the position of commander of the 1st Reserve Division, becoming another dazzling new star in the military. Tsukuda was naturally very excited about Yang Chendong's favor. When he learned that he could come to the battlefield of the Japanese Empire, he wanted to perform well and make a great contribution to prove that the 6th young master didn't misjudge him. But today, Tsukuda wasn't in a good mood. He actually had to go out with the 1st Cavalry Division and the new army to kill the enemy. Without the help of war horses, how could 2 legs outrun 4 legs? Pass down the order, don't rush too fast, tell everyone to save their strength. Tsukuda calmed down and said with a slightly disappointed tone. Commander, why? Is it because there are cavalry troops on both sides of us? The commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Kang Biao, was puzzled. He was also a general who fought on the battlefield, and could be said to have killed countless people. People like him often had a very obvious characteristic, and that was that he didn't know what death was. Seeing that Kang Biao was asking him why, Tsukuda said in a bad mood. Yes, it's because they are cavalry, and we can't keep up with them. Okay, you go and pass down the order. Tell the brothers that this time, we will focus on capturing captives. Tsukuda, who had a strategy, had already decided on a position for himself. Since his speed wasn't as fast as his allies, then he might as well capture captives. This was also a great merit. In this way, the left, middle, and right sides were all ready to attack. When the hands on the watches on the three commanders' wrists pointed at the time of attack, the 5-star army moved madly, and the earth shook, and the attack began. The cavalry troops on the left and right sides were the first to rush out. Looking from afar, they looked like a torrent that was rapidly approaching from afar. From afar, they covered the sky and covered the sun, bringing up billowing smoke and dust behind them. When looked at from afar, they were like arrows that had left the bow as they dashed over, and they carried an indomitable spirit and courage. From afar, their murderous aura filled the sky, giving people a feeling that they couldn't resist. The movement of the cavalry troops quickly attracted the attention of the opposite Japanese army. The moment the ground started to shake, some of the experienced veterans of the Japanese Empire quickly stood up. They first looked into the distance, wanting to see what had caused such a big movement. Then they got what they wanted. When they saw the countless cavalry troops in the distance, and the bright 5-star flag, their faces changed from curiosity to panic, and then to horror. Some of them were already trembling, some stood there stupidly, some turned around to get their weapons, and some couldn't help but retreat. They were ready to find a way to escape. In order to let the Japanese army have their own self-confidence, the higher-ups of the army suppressed the news that there was a large number of cavalry troops in the 5-star army. They only told them that the number of cavalry troops in the 5-star army was limited, and they wouldn't be able to play any role in such a big battle, so there was no need to worry. Originally, they didn't want to cause too much pressure on their own soldiers, but when the cavalry troops appeared, there was a huge contrast between what they understood and what they saw in reality. When they saw that the cavalry troops of the 5-star army were not a small group, but endless, the Japanese army was already in chaos. Hold on, archers, prepare to shoot, the rest of you prepare to stop the horses. The daimyo on the left side, Kazumi Kamikaze, was somewhat calm. Seeing the cavalry of the 5-star army getting closer and closer, he hurriedly gave the order. Although he didn't know what effect this would have, he couldn't take the lead to escape, right? As long as we can stop the cavalry's speed, we can wear them down. As if to encourage himself, and as if to give confidence to the soldiers below, Kazumi Kamikaze shouted loudly and issued the order. If Kazumi Kamikaze was a qualified commander, then Tanaka, who was guarding the right side, was too unprofessional. At this moment, he was still sleeping in the big tent, so when the soldiers below came to call him, he still didn't open his eyes. Get some cold water, go! It was Tanaka's confidant, and he was also one of his subordinates, so he had no choice but to order the soldiers. A bucket of cold water was quickly brought, then poured on Tanaka's body. Tanaka was stimulated by the cold water and finally woke up. When he saw that all of this was caused by his own soldiers, he was so angry that he raised his hand and slapped the elder, then he shouted angrily, "Baka! Master!" After the elder slapped him, he lowered his head, but soon he raised his head again and said, "The 5-star army has launched an attack, and they are using countless cavalry troops, let's run." What? Originally, he wanted to fiercely reprimand these daring soldiers, but when he heard the elder's words, he swallowed the words he wanted to say. He wanted to ask what was going on, and whether he had heard wrongly, but then he felt the ground tremble, and then he rushed out of the big tent without caring about anything else. Then, he saw the figures of the 5-star army cavalry in front of him. Using this short period of time, the 1st Cavalry Division that was attacking them was already in front of them, and Timur's troops charging at the front were even fighting with some of the Japanese army's vanguards. Without a unified command, even the arrows that were shot were scattered, and Tian, who led the cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division to the front of the Japanese Empire's military camp without any obstacles, and began their crazy killing journey. As everyone knew, the strongest cavalry in the world was the Mongolian elite cavalry, and their most glorious period was under the leadership of Genghis Khan, when they conquered the world. Compared to the Mongol elite cavalry of that period, the world's number 1 cavalry division was not any weaker. Especially since they had the 7-star steel crossbows and high-quality cavalry swords that Yang Qindong personally gave out. Their equipment was even better than the Mongol elite cavalry of that period. Yang Qindong was never stingy with what he could give, and the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division was also constantly charging forward, and if it was a battle of cold weapons, there was no one in the world who could be their opponent. Such an excellent cavalry unit, and they came prepared, their morale was high, and they were full of confidence. On the other hand, the Japanese army was not prepared at all, and the result was already decided when they charged forward. Now, it was just a matter of how long the defending side could defend, and how big the losses were. Tanaka pushed open the curtain of the big tent, and what he saw was the 1st Cavalry Division charging forward, and no one could stop them. He even clearly saw the Japanese army in charge of the security of the perimeter being beheaded by cavalry swords. Chapter 1080. As the blood splattered through the air, Tanaka felt a chill on his neck. It was not that he had never been on the battlefield before. On the contrary, he had killed many people, sometimes in a very cruel way. But when he saw the 1st Cavalry Division killing everywhere, he couldn't help but feel scared. He had a feeling that this was an army that killed people like flies, and that the 50,000 Japanese army he led could not stop them. Retreat, retreat, run! Tanaka finally couldn't suppress the fear in his heart. After shouting these words like a madman, he turned around and ran. The elders and soldiers behind him had to do their best to catch up so that they wouldn't fall behind. The scene of Tanaka running out of the big tent was seen by many soldiers of the Japanese Empire. Limited by their knowledge, these ordinary soldiers, including many who had just joined the army, did not have a deep understanding of the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division. They even arrogantly thought that they had the advantage in numbers. The only thing they lacked was the commander. The general drank too much last night, and no one was commanding them. The moment Tanaka appeared in front of the big tent, these soldiers seemed to have seen hope. Many of them had already clenched the swords in their hands, ready to fight back at any time. But then the general ran away without even leaving a decent sentence, which attracted the attention of the other soldiers. Then, they looked at each other in confusion. They were completely confused by the general's performance. But after a moment of hesitation, many people made a wise choice. The soldiers of the Japanese Empire, who had already picked up their swords and guns, and even put on their armor, quickly scattered and ran away. The general had run away, so what was the point of staying here? Waiting to be killed or taken captive? As long as they weren't stupid, they ran away. At this time, it wasn't about who ran faster, but as long as you ran a little faster than your companions, you might be able to escape from misfortune. An army, no matter how many people there were, and how much combat power they had, the moment their fighting spirit disappeared, they would be like chickens and dogs. There would be no threat at all. This was the case for the 50,000-strong Japanese army. When the 1st Cavalry Division rushed over and swept through the barracks like a gust of wind, what they faced was not the Japanese army that was putting up a desperate resistance. Instead, they were fleeing in all directions like defeated dogs. "Division Master, what should we do?" First Commander Temu and the other commanders asked Tian Hu in unison. "Bai Shuang will lead the 4th Regiment, and Gong Feng will lead the 5th Regiment to flank the enemy from the left and right. Try to keep as many Japanese army here as possible so that the 1st Reserve Division, abbreviation for the 1st Reserve Division, can get here soon. Capture as many prisoners as possible. The 1st Regiment, 2nd Regiment, and 3rd Regiment will follow me to help the new army." Tian Hu only pondered for a few moments before he made his decision. The smoothness of this battle was somewhat beyond his expectations. He still didn't know why the Japanese army was so weak, but when he saw the 1st Division and the other 2 divisions fighting, he knew that the Japanese army wasn't all useless. Perhaps there was something he didn't know about. If he was lucky, then the new army's luck wouldn't be too good. He decided to go over and help. Of course, Tianhu wasn't a god. He still had some selfish motives in his heart. For example, the new army's commander Su He had been secretly competing with him. If there was a chance, Tianhu didn't mind helping him and showing his strength. Tianhu gave the order, and not long after, the army was divided into 3 groups. At this moment, on the battlefield of the new army, the situation was in a stalemate. Unlike Tanaka, Kazumi didn't drink. The command authority and organization of the army were still there. The generals under him were also doing their duties step by step. Although the appearance of the new army was indeed beyond his expectations, after losing about 5,000 troops on the periphery, Kazumi still led the soldiers to block the new army's attack. What's going on? When Commander Su He saw that the front army was not making good progress, his face showed anger. He ordered someone to call the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, who was in charge of the vanguard. The commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division lowered his head. He wanted to explain that the Japanese army's defense was too tenacious. In addition, the ratio of veterans to recruits in the 2nd Cavalry Division was about the same, so they couldn't fully display their strength. This was why they couldn't achieve their military goal. But knowing Su He's temperament, the commander lowered his head and didn't say anything. If they didn't complete the mission, any explanation would be useless. Humph, the 2nd Cavalry Division will be replaced. Commander Ku, you go. After Su He lost his temper, he turned his gaze to the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Kulu. No matter what method you use, you must break the enemy's defense in at most 3 hours. Otherwise, you don't have to come back to see me. Yes, Commander. Kulu also said with a dignified face, but at the same time, he was also a little excited. The harder the battle on the battlefield, the more it showed the strength and characteristics of an army. In other words, after the challenge, there were also opportunities. The 2nd Cavalry Division was forced to be replaced. The 1st Cavalry Division rushed forward and launched a new round of fierce attacks. Under the leadership of Kulu, the Japanese army on the opposite side was put under more pressure. Commander Kazumi couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief when he saw the 5-star Army's cavalry retreat like a tide. In his opinion, the other parties should have seen his strength and retreated in the face of difficulties. But he didn't expect that soon. A new batch of cavalry began to charge, and this charge brought a lot of pressure to the front line. In less than half an hour, 5 generals had already asked for reinforcements. Seriously speaking, infantry was always at a disadvantage against cavalry. The reason why they were able to resist until now was because the Japanese army had already displayed their samurai spirit. They didn't fear hardship, and they didn't fear death. This was why they were able to resist the charge of the cavalry under such heavy losses. What followed was not small. Just the front line of the army had already been replaced 3 times. The casualties could be said to be extremely heavy. If it wasn't for Kazumi's determination to resist, they would have been defeated like Tanaka. When the 6th general sent someone to ask for reinforcements, Kazumi's face was already very ugly. He looked around and asked, "How many reserve troops do we have now?" Reporting to the commander, "There are still about 20,000. A subordinate quickly reported the answer. When he heard that 50,000 troops were lost so quickly, Kazumi's face showed a surprised expression. The 5-star army really lived up to its reputation. But now wasn't the time to think about these things. He looked at the sky. There was still more than an hour before it would be dark. He gritted his teeth and said, "Send these 20,000 people up. No matter what, we have to hold on until dark. This way, we can retreat under the cover of the poor light." At this time, Kazumi no longer had the intention to compete with the 5-star army. All he thought about was how to safely bring the army out and reduce the losses as much as possible. Without a doubt, the dark would be the best opportunity. At that time, everyone's vision would be poor. It would be the time for him to lead the army out of the battlefield. The Japanese army had increased their troops again. Seeing that the formation of arrows was about to break open a gap in the enemy's defense, more Japanese army rushed up to fill in the gaps. Commander Kalu had no choice but to give the order to retreat. In this charge, the 1st Cavalry Division lost nearly half of their men. Even if he, the division commander, personally took the role of the tip of the arrow, he only managed to kill a little more than the enemy. He also suffered some minor injuries. The Japanese army had increased their troops again. Commander Suhi saw this. He knew that the 1st Cavalry Division had done their best, so he didn't blame them. He also sent out the 3rd and 4th Cavalry Divisions who hadn't moved yet. Obviously, he also saw that the sky was getting dark. Once night fell, it would be impossible to completely wipe out the enemy. At this point, both sides had placed heavy bets. It was as if they would not stop until they fought to the death, and a victor was decided. Because of this, the battlefield became very cruel. The death toll on both sides rose sharply. The ground was littered with corpses, and the pungent smell of blood made it hard for people to breathe. Time passed by slowly. After the Japanese Empire had sent out all 50,000 troops, the effect was very obvious. They used the corpses as stumbling blocks to slow down the new army's advance and speed. This showed the strength of the Japanese army's samurai. If things continued to develop like this, the new army would definitely win in the end. However, it would only be a small victory. After all, when faced with an army of 50,000 people with tenacious fighting spirit, it would be very difficult for anyone to win. Unless they could hit the enemy with a single blow and completely disrupt their fighting spirit. And this possibility soon appeared. When the 1st Cavalry Division finally arrived at the side of the battlefield, Commander Tian Hu gave a command. When 6,000 elite cavalrymen rushed over with their swords, the balance of the battlefield was broken. The sudden appearance of the 1st Cavalry Division was like a sudden appearance. Their appearance was not only beyond the expectations of the Wanatian army, but also beyond the expectations of the new Third Army. Why are they here? Could it be that they have already taken care of the enemies on the other side? When Commander Suhi saw Tian Hu leading his troops to attack from the side, a look of shock flashed across his face. Then, he shook his head. He had to admit that the 1st Cavalry Division was worthy of the title of the strongest cavalry. Even if his cavalry division had more than 3 times the number of the enemy, it was still somewhat inferior in terms of fighting strength. Seeing that Tian Hu had personally charged into the battlefield with his swords, Suhi naturally wouldn't fall behind. With a shout, he led the 2nd Cavalry Division, which had rested for nearly 4 hours, to attack. At this point, the new army didn't have any backup plans. All 30,000 cavalrymen were on the battlefield. Chapter 1081. After the new army joined up with the 1st Cavalry Division, they already had more than 40,000 soldiers, and there wasn't much of a gap between them and the 50,000 Japanese army. In addition to the cavalry's suppression of the infantry, as well as the heavy casualties of the Japanese army, this attack was completely one-sided. Very quickly, the tip of the arrow's formation pierced through the enemy's defense, and the two sides finally engaged in a chaotic battle, beginning to crush each other. They only relied on their advantage in numbers to form a human shield, blocking the cavalry's charge. But when the two sides had equal military strength, especially with the sudden attack of the 1st Cavalry Division, it was tantamount to completely breaking the previous balance. Although Tian Hu's cavalry didn't have many people, their combat power was really amazing. Wherever they passed, not to mention people escaping, they didn't even leave behind many captives, which fully demonstrated their fierce and bloodthirsty side. This was seen by even more Japanese army, and the fighting spirit in their hearts was wiped out. No one knew who took the lead and shouted, "Run!" Then the army's morale collapsed, and the entire front line was disintegrating. No matter how much Kazumi shouted or ordered, it was completely useless. Since Kazumi was shouting so happily, he became Tian Hu's target. As the most powerful tip of the arrows, he led an extremely elite team of 30 people to crush all the way. No one was his opponent, and they quickly rushed to a place less than 100 meters away from Kazumi. When they rushed to this place, Tian Hu observed from the corner of his eyes that there was another cavalry team rapidly approaching. It was the commander of the new army, Suhi. His eyes flashed with a smile, and then he urged his horse to gallop. Under Suhi's slightly anxious gaze, he crossed the 100 meters distance to Kazumi's side. The commander of the Japanese Empire, who had been defending the position, saw the 5-star army cavalry coming in front of him, but his face was still as calm as water. He calmly pulled out the katana on his body, and made a posture that he was going to fight to the death. Kazumi, who had been practicing martial arts since he was young, had some martial arts. Although his individual combat power was not as good as the ninjas of the Japanese Empire, he was still qualified as a samurai. He was already prepared to cut down the 5-star army cavalry. He wanted to let the 5-star army know that as a commander of the Japanese army, he wasn't worse than anyone else, and he wouldn't allow anyone to have any ideas about him. Dang! Golden sparks flew, which was the golden sparks produced by the heavy force of the cavalry sword and the katana. Under the heavy force of the katana, Kazumi couldn't help but take a few steps back. He didn't expect the strength of the 5-star army cavalry to be so great. His arm was already sore from just one strike. But what he didn't expect was that when Kazumi was still thinking of using the force of his retreat to prepare for the second strike, another cavalry sword appeared in front of him. Then, he felt a pain in his neck, and there was a sweet taste in his throat. His vision began to blur, and his perception began to decline. He struggled with all his strength, and with the last of his strength, he looked down and saw that his chest had already been dyed red with blood. The blood wasn't anyone else's, it was his own. It was the second katana that Tian Hu suddenly pulled out and performed a miraculous feat he didn't expect it at all, and with a single strike, he ended his life. Kazumi was dead. Although Tian Hu was forced to use the second katana, because the process was too fast, it gave people the feeling that their commander had died tragically on the horse. Seeing this scene, the soldiers of the Japanese Empire, who originally wanted to hold on, turned pale. Without a commander, there was no unified command. Without a commander, it was like a group of dragons without a leader, and their fighting spirit was rapidly fading. Defeat was imminent, and there was no way to reverse the situation. The cavalry of the 5-star army was running all over the battlefield, and around them, more and more Japanese army were kneeling and surrendering. Anyone who wanted to escape by chance was greeted with sharp cavalry swords or arrows from afar. The situation was settled. Nishitohide was still waiting in the 5-star army's camp. Ever since he came here to see King Wunan of Damyang, he was trapped in this military tent. There were people who sent him food and drinks, but no one paid attention to him. When he wanted to go out and say that he wanted to see Bugnam of Gojoseon, there would always be people from the 5-star army in front of him. When they were annoyed by the questions, these soldiers would use Yang Chendong's health as an excuse to delay the meeting. After knowing that Yang Chendong was unwell, Nishitohide still hoped that he would die of illness somewhere else, so that the Japanese Empire would have one less strong opponent. But in his heart, he warned himself that this was simply impossible. Not to mention that he had seen Yang Chendong before, he was very young, and his health was very good. As a commander, there must be a lot of people taking care of him. How could he get sick so easily? If he wasn't sick, why didn't Yang Chendong want to see him, and why didn't he talk to him? Could it be, Nishitohide was very smart? Because of this, he thought of a terrible result. Could it be that Yang Chendong used the peace talks as bait to numb the army behind him, and then he would take the opportunity to do something? No matter how smart he was, he didn't think that Yang Chendong would launch an all-out attack. After all, both sides had fought for a day or two, and the strength of both sides had long been known during the war. Even if they wanted to launch a surprise attack, at most they would have some advantages in the beginning. Once the Japanese Empire's army reacted, the 5-star army would not be able to gain any advantages. They didn't know the real situation of the 5-star army at all. The main reason was that Yang Chendong had disguised himself well. For more than a month, he had only sent out the Foreign Alliance army. No matter how hard the battle was, he didn't send out any elites. Not only that, but he also selected the veterans who had been on the battlefield and withdrew them from the battlefield. This made the Japanese army united, and they all had the idea of looking down on the 5-star army. On the battlefield, Any idea of looking down on the opponent could very likely lead to a fatal disaster. Unfortunately, everyone knew this, but not many people could easily do it. Nishi Tohide, who had confidence in the Japanese army and looked down on the 5-star army, couldn't think of what Yang Chendong was planning. He simply stopped thinking about it and ate, drank, and slept well in the tent. He acted as if he wasn't in a hurry, and the 5-star army should be in a hurry. 4 days later, when Nishi Tohide was still sleeping comfortably in the tent, a few soldiers from the 5-star army came and said that the 6th young master wanted to see him. At this time, Nishi Tohide's face showed a trace of pride. What? He couldn't play psychological warfare anymore, and wanted to prepare for peace talks. He was ready to fight for more benefits for the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. That's right. Ming Shidwishio regarded the house arrest as Yang Chendong's probing. In his view, it was obvious that he had won. For this reason, when he walked all the way to the main tent, Nishi Tohide's face still had a confident and proud smile. He even imagined the moment when Yang Chendong would admit defeat. But all of this changed when he came outside the main tent and saw Kazumi's head placed outside the tent. He no longer had that smug look on his face. Instead, he broke out in a cold sweat. Ningshi Dwishio was already inexplicably shocked. He really couldn't figure out why General Kazumi's head would appear here. Wasn't he defending the front line of Chongmen Prefecture with 50,000 Japanese troops? On his side, there was another 50,000 Japanese army led by Wadamura. With these 100,000 people forming a strong line of defense, how could they die here? His face was full of confusion, but his whole body was already covered in cold sweat. When he entered the main tent and saw the sand table in front of him, he noticed that most of the Chongmen Prefecture's territory had been planted with red flags. The fear in his heart was even more serious. You killed General Kazumi? Under nervousness, Nishi Tohide no longer had the confident look he had when he was holding the Pearl of Wisdom. He said with a frightened expression. Sitting above the main tent, Yang Chendong's face was like spring. Facing Nishi Tohide's question, he didn't immediately answer. Instead, he looked at the petite Junko and smiled. Junko seemed to have received some kind of hint. First, she smiled at Yang Chendong, then looked at Nishi Tohide, who entered the tent, and said, Yes, he is dead. He dared to disobey the Emperor's order and helped Ashikaga Yoshimasa. This is what they deserve. As the former princess of the Japanese Empire, Junko hated Ashikaga Yoshimasa, including those who followed the general. In her heart, she hoped that these people would be buried with her father. Kazumi's death was just the beginning. Junko said this with anger, which made Nishi Tohide's face become even uglier. He saw Junko's anger, and knew that this was the result of her emotions. Whether it was out of self-esteem or because of his long-standing patriarchal mentality, he decided not to argue with Junko even though she was a princess. Instead, he looked at Yang Chendong and asked, But Nam of Gojoseon, aren't we negotiating? Did you just kill our people like this? This is not good. Nishi Tohide originally wanted to reprimand Yang Chendong verbally, but considering that he was in the enemy's tent, if his words were too harsh and angered Yang Chendong, he was afraid that the next result would be the same as Kazumi's. Being wronged and unable to speak out, this was the so-called diplomacy of a weak country. Junko didn't care about Ningshi Dwishio's feelings. From the moment she tried to kill her mother and killed her father and brother, she was already at odds with these military clans of the Neon country. Now that she was Yang Chendong's wife, both in her heart and in her body, her mentality had changed. Everything was for Yang Chendong's benefit. As for these former compatriots, she didn't care whether they lived or died. Junko didn't care, but Yang Chendong couldn't. He was very clear that although this battle was won, the military strength of the Japanese Empire was still there. The combined strength of the army and navy was still several times his own. If he continued to choose to fight with force, even if there was a day when he could defeat the enemy, he was afraid that he would have to pay a heavy price. Chapter 1082. None of this was what Yang Chendong wanted. What he wanted was to take over the entire Japanese empire without breaking any bones. In order to achieve this goal, he knew very well when to be tough and when to back down. Now that he had opened the door, it was time for others to perform. Now, he had to think about how to preserve his strength in the coming chaos. And in order to do this, the first step was to convince Nishi Toshiro. No one said that we can't fight during peace talks, not to mention that we haven't reached any agreement yet. So, you don't have to feel wronged on this point, Yang Chendong said with a lofty look. Although he was already prepared to back down, in terms of momentum, before he achieved his goal, he still had to pretend that he was in the right and that he was not going to let go. Yang Chendong's words were like a heavy hammer hitting Nishi Toshiro's chest, making him a little breathless. But as a smart person, and even the think tank that Ashikaga Yoshimasa relied on, he quickly heard the difference in Yang Chendong's words. The biggest difference between a smart person and a stupid person was that they could turn bad things in a direction that was beneficial to them. Those who did it well were smart, and those who didn't did it well were stupid. Banam of Gojoseon, are you saying that as long as we reach an agreement, you won't fight with us anymore? Yang Chendong was a little surprised that Nishi Toshiro caught the meaning of his words so quickly. But this was good, as it would save him a lot of effort. He nodded and said, "Yes, our 5-star army is also peace-loving. We have always had a friendly relationship with the Japanese Empire. This time, if you didn't attack my wife's family, do you think we would be willing to come all the way here to fight this war?" Yang Chendong admitted it, which made Nishi Toshiro see new hope. He immediately said, Yes, we acted recklessly before. I also sincerely apologize to Princess Junko for the death of the Emperor and Empress, and I am willing to compensate her. I just hope that Bugnam of Gojoseon will stop the war for the sake of the people who are suffering because of it. For this, you can make any request. Nishi Toshiro's meaning was very clear. He was willing to compensate Yang Chendong, and he was even willing to make great concessions. He just wanted Yang Chendong to stop the advance of the 5-star army in exchange for a temporary peace in the Japanese Empire. Of course, it was also to free up the hands of Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa to deal with all the opponents who jumped out, and to buy time for the reunification of the Japanese Empire. How could such a small idea be hidden from Yang Chendong? But this was exactly what he needed, so he nodded as if he didn't see anything. Well, seeing that you are so sincere, this king can consider it. No! Just as Yang Chendong finished speaking, Junko loudly objected. They killed my father emperor, my mother empress, and my brother. We can't let them go so easily. I want all the killers to pay with their lives. When Junko shouted like this, Nishi Toshiro's face became bitter. Originally, he thought that things had taken a turn for the better, but if Princess Junko objected, it was really hard to say how things would develop. Well, women shouldn't interrupt when men are talking. Yang Chendong suddenly spoke. He changed his previous understanding look and said very seriously like a male chauvinist. It was as if he didn't know Yang Chendong. Junko widened her eyes and looked at her husband in disbelief. Was this still the teacher she admired the most from the bottom of her heart? Was this still the 6th young master who gave her the feeling of a gentleman and was the most considerate person? Was this still the king who she was willing to give up everything, including her body? At this moment, Junko's face was constantly changing. Did she think that she was deceived? Did she think that after her family left, she had found a home and a backer in her life? Did she think that this man who she had always had a good impression of and trusted the most would definitely avenge her? But everything that happened now clearly told her that all of this was impossible. The other party was still a person who put benefits first, a person who was cold and ruthless to achieve his goals. Did he just want to deceive her into writing the document to announce to the world? Did he just want to deceive her feelings and body? Junko still looked at Yang Chendong with a look of astonishment, and even the tears in the corners of her eyes couldn't stop flowing out. Those were tears of sadness, tears of regret. This scene stunned Ningshi Duishio, who was at the side. But what was even more surprising was that Yang Chendong turned a blind eye to all of this and said to the people outside the tent, Come, send the 8th madam back to rest. Immediately, Beta Persei came in with Tu Longwei and politely asked Junko to leave. Junko didn't refuse. She knew that once Yang Chendong gave the order, everything she did would be in vain, so she was very cooperative. But when she left, she fiercely stared at Yang Chendong, as if everyone's hatred was undoubtedly expressed in this one glance. After Junko left, the big tent became quiet again. Yang Chendong looked at Ningxi Daxiu, who was still in a daze, and said, "What's wrong? Don't you want to continue the negotiation?" "Yes, yes." Ningxi Daxiu seemed to have just recovered, and took the initiative to say with some enthusiasm. Junko was escorted back to her tent, and then lay on the bed and cried bitterly. She once thought that even if her parents and brother left her, she would not be lonely, because there was a man who would take care of her, cherish her, and protect her. But all of this was destroyed because of what happened just now. She felt like she had just met Yang Chendong, and regretted it. At the same time, she secretly hated herself for being so stupid. She didn't even know that she had become a chess piece in his hands. She cried bitterly, and even when the maid Miko and the guard Xiaolin appeared, they were driven out by her. Now she just wanted to cry alone. She cried for more than half an hour, and then under extreme mental exhaustion, she fell asleep. She didn't know how much time had passed, until she felt a warm body on the cold bed. She habitually leaned over, looking for the chest that she thought was the most solid in her heart. But when she just leaned against the warm chest, Junko suddenly thought of something, and suddenly opened her eyes. When she saw that it was indeed her husband, Yang Chendong, lying beside her, she didn't know where she got the strength and courage, but she struggled to get up, and broke free from the restraint of Yang Chendong's right arm. "Lie down!" Feeling that Junko was really resisting, Yang Chendong suddenly said, and at the same time, increased the strength of his arm, and pressed Junko to his side again. Junko gasped for breath, feeling that Yang Chendong was angry, but she wasn't afraid, because she could no longer see the hope of life, and she had already decided to die. Since that was the case, what was there to be afraid of? At most, she would die. "Let go of me? You liar!" While struggling with all his might, he continued to shout. It was clear that he was not going to give in no matter what. "How did I lie to you?" A gentle voice suddenly sounded in her ear. Then Yang Chendong's arms exerted a little force, and completely controlled Junko, making her unable to move. His voice sounded again. "I remember that in class, sometimes we shouldn't believe our eyes and ears, because what they represent may not be the most true side. Do you still remember?" Junko was stunned by this sentence. What kind of situation was this? Why was he still thinking of teaching her? Did he really think that she was a fool? A naive girl who was deceived but still obedient. She wanted to continue resisting, but then Yang Chendong's voice sounded in her ear again. "Give me half a quarter of an hour to explain. If you still want me to leave after hearing what I have to say, I will agree. How about it?" The magnetic voice sounded, and it was particularly pleasant to hear. For some reason, Junko became quiet. Maybe she didn't believe that Yang Chendong would deceive her, and she always wanted an explanation. Junko became obedient, and Yang Chendong's voice sounded in her ear. In just a moment, Junko's face began to change. First it was surprise, then it was surprise, and finally it became surprise. After Yang Chendong finished, Junko hurriedly said, "You mean, everything before was just an act, just to make Ningxi Daxiu and Ashikaga Yoshimasa behind her lower their guard?" "Yes." Yang Chendong nodded. Just now, he was explaining this matter to Junko. He was making Ningxi Daxiu lower her guard, because he knew that she was very smart, and it was not easy to make her fall into his trap, so he came up with such a trick. Sure enough, Junko cooperated very well. Because the act was enough, the following negotiation was very smooth. At this moment, Ningxi Daxiu had reached a consensus with Yang Chendong and left the 5-star army's camp. Junko, who finally knew everything, had forgiven Yang Chendong in her heart, but on the surface, she still pretended to be angry and said, "If that's the case, why didn't you tell me in advance, so that I could be prepared? If you told me in advance, would you still be able to perform so perfectly?" Would you still be able to deceive Ningxi Daxiu? Yang Chendong asked. This time, Junko didn't speak. Indeed, if she knew everything in advance, she wouldn't be able to perform so well. If she couldn't even deceive herself, how could she deceive others? Wouldn't that delay Yang Chendong's plan? Chapter 1083. Seeing the understanding look on Junko's face, Yang Chendong chuckled. Well, don't be angry. I didn't have a choice just now. Besides, Nishi Toshihide has promised that it won't take long for him to be sent to the camp. At that time, he will be handed over to you. You can deal with him however you want, okay? Yang Chendong took the initiative to explain, apologize, and reason. He showed his sincerity. With his current status, it was very difficult for him to say these things. Junko knew that going too far was as bad as falling short. She smiled and said, Well, since you are so sincere, then I will forgive you. It's just forgiveness. After I do this, it's equivalent to avenging you. Shouldn't there be a reward? Yang Chendong smiled and said. His big hand had already moved on Junko's body. With a cry of surprise, Junko soon started to pant. The entire garden was intoxicating. After Nishi Toshihide left the 5-Star Army's camp, he rushed all the way to the Onion District, appeared in the main tent of the Japanese Empire's camp, and appeared in front of Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He rushed back, even rushed day and night, just to tell the Supreme General the conditions that he and Yang Chendong agreed. The army couldn't be the enemy of the 5-Star Army. It was too dangerous and full of too many unknowns. Ninji Dosa rushed back. Ashikaga Yoshimasa received him in the main tent, but his face was dark the whole time. He looked very unhappy. It was no wonder. Previously, he sent this person over to stop the war. As a result, he lost nearly 100,000 troops and lost his territory in Xiamen Prefecture. How could he not be angry? All of this was because he trusted Ningxi Duishio too much. Now that the main character was here, it was time to settle the score. Supreme General, good news, good news. Ninhei Dosu knew that the army had suffered a great loss because of him, so when the two sides met, he called out to Ashikaga Yoshimasa in order to give himself a chance to speak. Otherwise, based on his understanding of Ashikaga Yoshimasa would probably push him out of the tent and behead him. This was very useful, at least it made Ashikaga Yoshimasa interested. Good news? What good news? Since the Supreme General asked, Nishi Toshihide finally had the opportunity to speak. He immediately told the process and the result of his negotiation with Yang Chendong. This talk took a long time, and Ashikaga Yoshimasa frowned and narrowed his eyes. Finally, when Nishi Toshihide finished, Ashikaga Yoshimasa also asked, You said that you have negotiated with Bugnam of Gojoseon to give the other party the entire Shanyang-dao region, and the other party has promised that they will not be enemies with us, right? Yes, Bugnam of Gojoseon said so. In order to ensure that there will be no problems, I also drafted an agreement with Bugnam of Gojoseon's name and seal as proof. Nishi Toshihide took out a document and handed it to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. On the document, Yang Chendong's name and seal were indeed on it, and it also recorded the results of the negotiation. For example, as long as the 5-Star Army has occupied the West Sea Province and the Shanyang-dao region, then they can make a guarantee and promise to coexist peacefully with the Supreme General. Unless the other party takes the initiative to send troops to attack them, otherwise this agreement will be valid for a long time. Taking out 2 regions in one go was equivalent to publicly admitting that they belonged to the 5-Star Army. This was no different from betraying the country. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was a little hesitant. He was considering the consequences of doing this. Seeing Ashikaga Yoshimasa's hesitation, Nishi Toshihide was afraid that he would not agree in a fit of anger, so he hurriedly said, Supreme General, although it seems that we have suffered some losses, you can deal with the 5-Star Army. But without the 5-Star Army as a major enemy, you can free yourself to deal with the other opposing forces. As long as you annihilate all those people and take their forces as your own, you will control the 5 major regions. At that time, you won't have any worries. Wouldn't it be easy to deal with the 5-star army? In the end, this is still our Japanese Empire's territory. In the words of the Han people, even a strong dragon cannot suppress a local snake. Nishi Toshihide had a good plan. From the beginning to the end, he did not have any intention of giving in to the 5-star army. Everything was just a temporary measure. He only wanted to buy time to stabilize the rear and increase his strength. This was also why he dared to agree to this agreement, and personally appeared in front of Ashikaga Yoshimasa to persuade him. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's days were not easy at all. Ever since the death of the emperor, he knew that there was going to be a storm. Otherwise, why didn't he take the initiative to kill his way into the palace and destroy the royal family? Why did he allow them to be high and mighty? At the very least, that was the impression he gave to outsiders. Kuki Kiyoshi had killed the emperor's entire family without any warning. This had indeed brought him a lot of trouble. Fortunately, the Japanese Empire was currently in a period of chaos. This was where his hope lay. There shouldn't be many people paying attention to the royal family. However, Princess Junko's announcement to the world changed everything. For a time, his forces became an existence that everyone wanted to kill. It seemed that if one wanted to become the legitimate force, they only needed to scold them and send troops to fight them to prove that they were legitimate. Because of this, not only were the troops temporarily unable to be recruited in time, but the 5-star army was also suddenly pressing on the front. With an interception in front and a pursuit behind, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was already in a dangerous situation. If the 5-star army suddenly stopped attacking, this would undoubtedly give him a chance to catch his breath. With enough time, he would be able to get rid of those people who wanted to beat him while he was down. Ning Shidoxius saw this and agreed to Yang Chendong's request without asking for permission. He also believed that as long as Ashikaga Yoshimasa wasn't stupid, he would definitely make the wisest and smartest choice. To be able to become a great general, not only was he brave, but Ashikaga Yoshimasa was also a very smart person. He only hesitated for a moment before nodding heavily. Fine, let's give the Sanyang path to the 5-star army first. However, I will soon let them know that eating this great general's food is not that easy to swallow. Ashikaga Yoshimasa agreed and then issued a few orders. The 400,000 Japanese Empire troops stationed in the Sanyang path began to retreat. After leaving the Sanyang path, they didn't return to Ping and Beijing. Instead, they went straight to the Hokuriku, Tokai, and Shanin paths. There were already many warlords of the Japanese Empire there who wanted to take advantage of the chaos. Now was the time to deal with them. The Japanese army withdrew and gave up the entire Sanyang path. Yang Chendong, who was already prepared, immediately gave an order. Then, the 5-star army quickly moved forward and occupied the empty area that was not guarded by any army. Considering that they left in a hurry, most of the 2 million people of the Japanese Empire in the Sanyang path didn't leave. Faced with such a large number of people, Yang Chendong immediately ordered them to board the transport ships and move them away. Yang Chendong never had a good impression of the Japanese Empire, so he didn't have much feelings for the people here. In order to complete this task, he also authorized the division commanders under him to threaten the people of the Japanese Empire if they resisted and refused to leave with the ships. However, it was best not to kill them. Of course, if they encountered people who were very cooperative, they had to deal with them with a smile. After all, these people would become Yang Xie's people in the future. Just as Yang Chendong expected, during the migration process, they did encounter some resistance from the people of the Japanese Empire. They used the reason that they had lived here for generations and refused to obey the orders of the 5-star army. There were even some people who wanted to take advantage of the fact that there were many people around them and scolded the 5-star army. There were even some who directly threatened to attack them. Towards these people, the soldiers of the 5-star army who had already received orders didn't show any mercy. Those who scolded him were given a few punches and slaps to teach him a lesson. Those who threatened him with force were given a round of beatings, causing him to be seriously injured. According to Yang Chendong, other than not taking their lives, he had done everything he could to beat and scold them. For this matter, the five-star army also prepared for a large-scale cleanup if the local people resisted. For this reason, the matter was also reported to Yang Chidong. If something unexpected happened, he would order the encirclement and suppression order. In response to this request, Yang Chidong smiled and didn't sign it. Instead, he confidently said to Beta Persei, who sent the letter, "Don't worry, these people won't dare to do anything. As long as we show enough strength, they will definitely be more obedient than anyone else." Yang Chidong was used to the development and current situation of the Japanese Empire in later generations, so he naturally understood them very well. So when this order was issued to the army, some people thought that the sixth young master was too confident. Seeing that they were about to leave their homeland where they had lived for many years, how many people would be willing to obey? Regardless of whether the people below had doubts or not, the truth was the most real thing. When the five-star army showed their fists, the people of the Japanese Empire really became a lot more obedient. Those who took the initiative to jump out and wanted to use the fact that there were many people around them to cause trouble discovered that when the five-star army really did not hold back, their fellow countrymen, and even their neighbors chose to stand by and watch. They chose to ignore it and stay out of it. This was naturally related to the national characteristics of the Japanese Empire. This was a nation that advocated the strong and powerful. Just like in later generations, when the Americans threw out 2 bombs, they, who were originally arrogant, became obedient. Later, when the Americans stationed troops on their island and repeatedly did some things that angered the heavens, nothing happened. In this regard, Huaxiao's performance was much better than the Japanese Empire. In the face of the invasion and even domination by foreign races, they had been constantly resisting. Even if they knew that the hope was very small, there were still people who did it. Just like when the Ming dynasty was destroyed and the Qing dynasty was established, the so-called third prince of the Ming dynasty also lasted for hundreds of years and resisted for hundreds of years. Chapter 1084. Speaking of which, after the five-star army showed their fists, the 2 million citizens of the Japanese Empire began their migration. For this reason, Yang Chidong had already informed the various provinces and regions to prepare for the reception work. At the same time, the citizens of the various provinces who were preparing to migrate to the Japanese Empire began to move towards the Japanese Empire. A migration of different ethnic groups was underway. Yang Chidong's timing was very good. While Ashikaga Yoshimasa was clearing out the internal forces, he carried out his own activities to minimize the possibility of being harassed and disrupted. For example, Ashikaga Yoshimasa had received news that the five-star army had taken away the citizens of the empire and replaced them with other foreigners. However, he couldn't do anything about it. At the moment, he was focused on clearing out and dealing with the other domestic forces. The flat well field in the northern land was one of the main targets to be dealt with. This person was originally an important minister that the emperor relied heavily on. He had once come up with many ideas to deal with Ashikaga Yoshimasa, but in the end, he had angered Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Considering that it wasn't time to fall out with the royal family, the Supreme General transferred this person to the northern land, which wasn't very big. He hoped that time would slowly grind this person down. Unexpectedly, after a short period of time, the flat well field had become a force to be reckoned with. Not only did it forcefully unify the northern land, but it also created an army of 100,000 people, which became the strongest army to oppose the Supreme General's forces. When Princess Junko's decree was announced to the world, this person was the first to respond, which influenced the other warlords. After that, everyone took pride in beating and cursing Ashikaga Yoshimasa's army. Whoever did this would be the rightful ruler. Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa relied on forceful methods to get to where he was today. How could he just watch others beat and curse him without retaliating? In order to show his strength, he didn't choose the weak at the beginning. Instead, he targeted the flat well field directly. He wanted to let others know what the consequences of angering him were. He wanted to see if anyone dared to oppose him in the future. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's army was constantly being mobilized. In the blink of an eye, it had reached 250,000 soldiers. However, it seemed that it wasn't enough. More soldiers were coming to the northern land. The flat well field, which only had 100,000 soldiers, was also under great pressure. He was also preparing his counterattack. For example, he kept trying to rope in the surrounding warlords, big and small, in order to fight against the Supreme General's army. For example, he spread the rumor that the Supreme General was a threat. He claimed that once he was eliminated, the other warlords would soon follow in his footsteps. For example, he used the reason that the Supreme General had given up the entire Mountain Sun path to the Five-Star Army. He reprimanded the Supreme General for his actions of betraying the country. He also complained about the 2 million people of the Japanese Empire who were about to be relocated. He used to follow the Emperor of the Garden. He learned what it meant to take advantage of the situation, and what it meant to oppress people with power. The flat well field played tricks with what he was good at. When all kinds of rumors spread, there were indeed voices of opposition to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Especially when the 2 million people of the Mountain Sun path were indeed being relocated. Once the news spread, it attracted many people's opposition. With the mentality of bullying the weak and fearing the strong, they did not have the intention to attack the Five-Star Army. In just 2 days, the news of the Japanese Empire's 100,000 soldiers being wiped out had already spread. The strength of the Five-Star Army was painted with a mysterious symbol. Not daring to provoke the Five-Star Army did not mean that they would not do anything. For example, they could always attack the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa's army. Although this force was very big, there were also many opponents. As long as the small forces gathered together, they still had the power to fight. The flat well field's tactics worked. For their own survival, more and more small warlords joined the army to resist Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Who asked this person to be so strong that he broke the original balance? The news spread to the Supreme General's ears one by one. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was furious. If he had known that the flat well field was so talkative and difficult to deal with, he would have killed this person when he was in the palace to prevent future troubles. Now, it was too late to say anything. The only thing he could do was to send out troops to eliminate this person. With this as an example, he wanted to see who would dare to make an enemy out of him. After Yang Chendong came to the Japanese Empire, an even bigger civil war broke out. After gathering an army of 300,000, Ashikaga Yoshimasa personally took up the role of the Supreme General and began to attack and occupy the Hokuriku. The flat well field also joined forces with the 50,000 warlords in the surrounding area. Thus, a chaotic war between the 400,000-strong army began. When an even bigger civil war broke out in the Japanese Empire, the one who was happy was Yang Chendong. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he methodically moved the citizens of the Japanese Empire in exchange for a large number of foreign citizens. He continued to forge a new Japanese empire. At the same time, even more foreign allied forces were sent to the front lines of the Japanese Empire. However, when these areas all belonged to the same power, and the Five-Star Army had successively conquered Luzon and North Korea, and started to march towards the Japanese Empire, the various powers finally became vigilant and felt a sense of crisis in their hearts. They knew that if they continued to underestimate the Five-Star Army and Yang Xie, there would be a day when they would become the next target. Among them, the great Ming dynasty, which was famous in the vicinity and was often regarded as one of the most powerful states in the Celestial Empire, was the most worried. The Emperor of Baiming, Zhu Qiyu, was one of the most worried. Looking at the map in front of him, other than the southern Ming dynasty in the south and the northern wasteland in the north, his west and east were all occupied by the Five-Star Army. In other words, if he were to encounter danger, he wouldn't even have a place to retreat. Although Baiming's strength wasn't bad, especially in the past few years, they had been vigorously developing their military, allowing them to have an army of several million soldiers. This gave them a feeling of transcendence when facing any power. However, when facing the Five-Star Army, he still didn't have enough confidence. "We can't let the Five-Star Army continue to develop like this." Zhu Qiyu looked at the map on the wall and muttered to himself, but it was as if he had made up his mind. Ever since he received the 5 million taels of silver from Yang Qindong and established the Ming Bank, Zhu Qiyu used various methods to increase the amount of silver he could use. His self-confidence also continued to grow, and some of the goals he had set before also began to change. His original plan was to defend against the invasion of the grassland tribes in the west, defeat the southern Ming dynasty in the south, and unify the Ming dynasty. As for the 5-star army, being able to be a king with a different surname was already a great honor. But now, this plan had to change. It wasn't for anything else, but because the rise of the 5-star army was too fast. It was so fast that it had already become a colossus, an existence that couldn't be ignored. If they weren't careful, it could even become the biggest threat. There had never been any true friendship between countries, only mutual benefits. In the past, the 5-star army had the opportunity to continuously develop and strengthen, but it hadn't reached a level where it could make people wary. At most, they would be afraid. However, now that the war with the Japanese Empire had begun, according to the 5-star army's usual practice, it was very likely that it wouldn't be long before this place became one of the new Yangtze's territories. At this moment, some people could no longer endure. First, Ming's Zhu Qiyu made a move. He didn't even inform any of the court officials. Perhaps he was already a little worried about these people. He sent out a group of eunuchs who were completely loyal to him. He sent eunuchs secretly to the southern Ming Empire and the grasslands. For the sake of safety, even the chief eunuch Jining was bypassed. However, because this person's goal was too big, some confidential matters were left in his hands, making people feel uneasy. This time, Zhu Qiyu found the Imperial Horse Supervisor Eunuch and East Factory Manager Gao Rang, who was second only to the Ceremony Directorate of the 24 Directorates. He handed the matter over to him to handle. Chapter 1085. Gao Rang didn't disappoint. He quickly found his confidants and arranged for them to secretly travel to the southern Ming Empire and the Wara's leader, Yesen. To be able to become the leader of a faction, all of them were intelligent people. Even if they were confused for a short while, they would quickly make the right choice after being reminded. There was no doubt that the southern Ming Emperor, Zhu Qizhen, and the Wala's leader, Yesen, were both such people. The southern Ming Empire was currently considering its own unification. It seemed like the problem of the little prince of Nanming had been solved, but Zhu Huichen, the prince of 3 provinces, had appeared. Just as they were thinking about how to deal with this person, Ming took the initiative to express goodwill and said that they wouldn't amass a large number of troops at the border. This was like someone sending a pillow to Zhu Qizhen when he was sleepy. Zhu Qizhen had no reason to refuse. The Wara's leader, Yesen, was also having a headache recently. Because of the terrain, he was currently sandwiched between the forces of Ming, the 5-star army, and the Ili. There was limited space for him to move around, especially when the 50,000 Liaodong iron cavalry appeared. They would occasionally find opportunities to attack him, giving him a headache. The Emperor of Ming suddenly sent an envoy to express goodwill. This was exactly what he wanted, so there was no reason to refuse. Thus, in a short period of time, Zhu Qiyu's art of coordination had already reached a certain level. Without the constraints of the southern Ming Empire and the grasslands, he could finally relax and focus on developing his own strength. Thus, he did 2 things in succession. First, increase the support for the Liaodong iron cavalry. Relying on the large amount of gold and silver that Ming Bank had obtained a while ago, he increased the investment in the reserve soldiers of the Liaodong iron cavalry. This was to achieve a truly strong army in a short period of time. Second, they could send someone to cross the sea to contact Ashikaga Yoshimasa and express their willingness to send troops to help. While disrupting Yang Qindong's plan to conquer the Japanese Empire, they could also obtain sufficient benefits for themselves. In Zhu Qiyu's eyes, he had never taken the Japanese Empire seriously. In his view, it was just a small island country. Although the population was not small, after all, they had only lived on the island for generations. Whether it was the background or vision, they were too far away from him. Such a country could not have any great prospects, let alone pose any threat to the great Ming dynasty. If it wasn't for Yang Qindong setting his target here, he wouldn't have bothered to intervene in this matter. Those who weren't from the future naturally didn't know the future potential of the Japanese Empire, as well as the powerful ambitions in their hearts. It wasn't wrong to say that Zhu Qiu had such thoughts, but Yang Qindong also had his own insistence. He knew the situation in the future. This time, since he had taken action, he had no intention of letting the Japanese Empire go. Not to mention, if he wanted to unify the world, this was also a place where he had to fight. After the eunuch sent by Gao Rang secretly rowed the boat to the island, he soon saw Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was a little anxious. Although the Supreme General had already reached a certain agreement with Yang Qindong, he was surprised to find that those people were not easy to deal with when he went back to deal with the opposing forces in the country. They were not as easy to deal with as he had imagined. It was just like Hirai Ida in Hokuru Island. Although the Supreme General had twice the military strength of Hirai Ida, the Supreme General was not as easy to deal with as he had expected. Instead, the Supreme General was gradually in a stalemate with Hirai Ida in Hokuru Island. Of course, Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't know that although Yang Qindong couldn't send troops to help the Flatwell field on the surface, in private, he had taken out a lot of money to support the other side. The most important thing for soldiers to fight was to be paid. This was the main reason why ordinary people were attracted to join the army. With enough money, more people could be attracted to join the army, and more people would be encouraged to perform better on the battlefield. This was the so-called people die for wealth. It was precisely because of the wealth in their hands that the Flatwell Field's control over the army became stronger. At the same time, under the stimulation of money, the soldiers also showed their potential and performed better on the battlefield. As if he had returned to his teenage years, Hirai Ida's strength had greatly increased. Although there was not much change in his military strength due to certain reasons, the increase in his combat power still brought a lot of trouble to his opponent, Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He had an army of 300,000 that was twice his size, but they had not made much progress even after a month of hard fighting. Instead, they had suffered heavy losses, and their strength had been greatly reduced. This result was naturally not what Ashikaga Yoshimasa wanted to see. However, facing the Flatwell Field army that seemed to have completely changed, he really didn't have any better ideas. Especially when he found out that Yang Qindong's 5-star army had completed more than 70% of the reconstruction work. In other words, he felt a sense of danger when he saw that Yang Qindong's 5-star army was about to pull out of trouble. It was at this time that the eunuch envoys sent by Ming arrived. This also gave Ashikaga Yoshimasa new hope. The two sides met in secret and talked for a full day and night. Finally, they reached a series of agreements. When he walked out of the tent the next day, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's face had already changed from a dispirited look to a radiant one. History had also changed at this moment. At least in his own tent, Yang Qindong was stunned for a long time when he received the news from the intelligence department. Young Master, Ashikaga Yoshimasa suddenly announced that the Japanese Empire has become an island of Ming and is an inseparable part of it. Regarding this matter, Ming's envoy also took out the imperial edict personally written by the acting emperor and announced it to the public. When Beta Persei said this, he was also confused. He didn't know how this trick was done, but he could also understand one thing. That is, the situation has changed. For the 5-star army, for the young master, this is not a good thing. This is of course not a good thing. Ashikaga Yoshimasa suddenly hugged Ming's thigh, which is equivalent to becoming full of confidence. One must know that in that era, the great Ming dynasty was still very famous. At least in the eyes of the Japanese Empire, it was a very powerful country. It was an existence that they couldn't provoke and couldn't afford to provoke. With this in mind, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who had the support of Ming, naturally had more confidence and trumped cards. He was afraid that he would soon put great pressure on the forces opposing him in the Flatwell Field. The situation of the war would also change. Of course, the pressure that brought Yang Chendong was that Baiming suddenly made a move and fully supported Ashikaga Yoshimasa. In this way, it would undoubtedly be much more difficult for him to send troops to occupy this place. This is because once Yang Chendong continues to use force, it would be tantamount to becoming an enemy of Baiming. At least until now, he had not fully prepared himself in this regard. Investigate again. Yang Chendong, who said this to Beta Persei, sat in the chair and slowly closed his eyes. Not fully prepared mentally in this regard did not mean that he was not prepared. For example, after several years of development, and after investing a huge amount of money and material resources, the first city was already self-sufficient. This was also Yang Chendong's preparation for the possibility that Baiming might suddenly cut off his transportation line. The origin city might be barely self-sufficient, but in the far eastern region of the Siberia region, the supplies there were still very scarce. If this line of communication was cut off now, the impact on that region would be very great. Considering that the great Ming dynasty's genie guards could be said to be everywhere, Yang Chendong believed that Zhu Qiyu should be aware of the army he sent to Siberia. This was why he played such a trick in order to curb the development of the five-star army. It could even be regarded as a warning. Zhu Qiyu's move really made Yang Chendong very uncomfortable. The best way he could do now was to retreat. For example, withdraw from the Japanese Empire and return the territory he had previously occupied in order to show goodwill to Baiming and keep the transportation line unblocked. After solving these problems in the future, and having the strength to compete with Baiming, he would send troops to the Japanese Empire. Yangtze's development seemed to be very fast, and the progress was very smooth. However, in the end, their foundation was still too weak, especially with the rapid expansion plan. So many occupied places were not safe. From time to time, civil strife would break out in some areas and provinces, and it would take some effort to pacify them. Internal stability was a big problem, and the lack of military strength also gave Yang Chendong quite a headache. Considering the elite route, considering that the morale of the people was not very stable, and the expansion of the troops was also a problem, the size of the five-star army had always been small. Although the five-star army had been expanding again and again, especially the appearance of the foreign coalition army, it was still too small compared to Baiming, who already had 4 million soldiers. It was precisely because of this lack of manpower that Baiming saw the opportunity and dared to jump out at this time to help Ashikaga Yoshimasa and take the opportunity to suppress him. Of course, in addition to retreating, Yang Chendong had another way, and that was to continue to do things his own way and continue to attack the Japanese Empire with the risk of falling out with Baiming. Moreover, Baiming without the navy could only help the Japanese Empire with limited help. It was just that in this way, the pressure on him would be too great. It was possible that the transportation line would be cut off, and even Shirkai would become an isolated city in an instant, and it might be besieged by the Baiming army at any time. There was a saying that went, "For small gains, lose big gains." If he made the second choice, the result might be like this. Then it was better to choose the first choice, recharge his strength, and wait for the next battle when his wings were full. If it was anyone else, they would probably choose the second choice. Even if there was any reluctance, they would have to give up all the benefits in front of them. But this matter fell on Yang Chendong's head, and he really wanted to take the risk. "Someone, call Wang Shan over." After closing his eyes for a long time, Yang Chendong suddenly opened his eyes again, and his voice was clearly heard. Soon, the exclusive telegrapher, Wang Shan, came to Yang Chendong's tent with the radio station. Chapter 1086. Ashikaga Yoshimasa had suddenly become a member of the Baiming imperial court. Even though the current Baiming imperial court was not as glorious as the Ming dynasty, it still put a lot of pressure on the other warlords of the Japanese Empire. Some of the smaller factions of the Japanese Empire who had wanted to send troops to harass the Supreme General hesitated and decided to bide their time. Using this opportunity, Ashikaga Yoshimasa sent out the eloquent and resourceful Nishi Toshihide to various places to put pressure on them and express his goodwill. He said that as long as they were willing to turn over a new leaf, he would let bygones be bygones. He would even consider fighting for more benefits for everyone when the new country was established. Once the promise was made, coupled with Nishi Toshihida's ability, many people responded quickly. It was still the same old saying that benefits were the only thing that would never change. In the face of benefits, the previous dirty deeds were nothing at all. In just 10 days, 7 small and medium-sized forces expressed their intention to attach themselves to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. These people added up to about 15,000 people. Although the number of people didn't seem to be a lot, the beginning was always the hardest. Once there was a good start, the following matters would be much easier to handle. Another 10 days passed, and another 30,000 people changed their allegiance. They went from being opposed to Ashikaga Yoshimasa to supporting him. Not only that, but 10,000 of these 30,000 people were originally allies of the Flatwell Field. With this change in attitude, the Flatwell Field was facing a crisis. When the factions weren't as united as one, Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa took this opportunity to launch a counterattack. He attacked the Hokuriku province, and 5 days later, he took over the Hokuriku province's Ekizen prefecture and headed straight for the Flatwell Field's headquarters, Iwachung Prefecture. 2 months had passed since Yang Chendong took over the jurisdiction of the Shanyan Path. The migration of the people had been completed, and the people transferred from other provinces were trying their best to integrate into the environment and climate. In half a month, the land distribution would be completed. When that time came, if someone came and wanted to reoccupy the land, even if Yang Chendong agreed, the people who had received the land would not agree. Yang Chendong had already made a decision about Baiming's interference in the Japanese Empire. He didn't choose to back down, and instead, he chose to face. Firstly, the current chaos in the Japanese Empire was the best opportunity for him to make a move. If he backed out now, he didn't know when such a good opportunity would appear again. Secondly, compared to his own goal, Yang Chendong's time was tight. It wasn't hard to imagine. He definitely wouldn't allow his limited time to waste on the Japanese Empire. So what if it was Baiming? If it was a confrontation, then so be it. He was no longer the great Ming dynasty, and even if he was, he wouldn't be afraid with the advantage of Okura. Speaking of Okura's advantage, Yang Chendong had already sent a telegram to the Army Command Headquarters. He ordered the Deputy Commander Ling Song to send the 4th Division of the 1st Army and the 7th Division of the 2nd Army from Southeast Asia to the Japanese Empire using transport ships. This time, not only were they using 2 firearms, but they were also using a lot of cannons. Yang Chendong was ruthless. If Ashikaga Yoshimasa resisted too fiercely, he wouldn't mind using cannons to teach him a lesson. In short, this time, he would definitely destroy the Japanese Empire. Before this, Yang Chendong first contacted Tiger's Mane, Yumian, and the others in the first city. He directly told them that once he continued to make a move in the Japanese Empire, it was very likely that Baiming would cut off the transportation line. At that time, the other party wouldn't be able to be self-sufficient, while also ensuring the basic supply of supplies to the Far East. The first city had only been built for a few years. It was already very difficult to be self-sufficient without the support of Chichen City. Now, they still had to provide help to the Far East. Although it was only a basic supply, the pressure was still not small. In this regard, Yang Chendong didn't have too many expectations. However, to his surprise, after some discussion, Tiger's Mane and Yumian quickly replied that there was no problem. When they made this answer, only God knew how much pressure they were under. When Yang Chendong received the reply, he was excited. At the same time, he asked Wang Shan to call back and thank Tiger's Mane and Yumian for their sacrifice for the overall situation. At the same time, he would solve the matter of the Japanese Empire as soon as possible and reopen the transportation line. Not to mention that Yang Chendong was making all kinds of preparations and efforts. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was also not idle. After receiving the support of Baiming, he seemed to have become the embodiment of justice and the orthodox existence. More and more forces had joined him, and many of the middle forces were wavering. It could be seen that it wouldn't be long before these people would also choose him. This directly caused a lot of pressure on Shuichi Hirata. Their original allies had either rebelled or wavered. In any case, it was impossible to count on them to contribute any more. The original army of 150,000 people had been reduced to less than 100,000 people. Ashikaga Yoshimasa also began to sound the horn of attack. It seemed that he wanted to take advantage of the situation to settle the situation. The reason why Ashikaga Yoshimasa was so confident was because of Kobayakawa's secret surrender. Kobayakawa was a force with nearly 20,000 soldiers. With his strength, he was worthy of being called a big name. Initially, he didn't like Ashikaga Yoshimasa, or perhaps he wanted to use this opportunity to gain benefits. That was why he formed an alliance with the so-called like-minded Flatwell Field, causing quite a lot of trouble for his opponents. After Zhu Qiu's move, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's confidence began to increase, and it also changed Kobayakawa's mind. Especially after secretly meeting Nishidaxu, the balance in his heart finally changed. Nishidaxu was a very smart person. This time, not only did he want Kobayakawa to be his pawn, he also asked him not to announce his surrender. He wanted him to be prepared to deal a heavy blow to the Flatwell Field at the crucial moment. This was to prove that he had joined the great general's camp. Kobayakawa, of course, would not refuse. He agreed immediately and began to wait for the opportunity. When he finally saw the great general's attack, he knew that he was about to be put to good use. He secretly mobilized his troops and was prepared to attack the Flatwell Field at any time. But at this time, a piece of news came that made him hesitate. In just 3 days, 6 leaders of the Japanese Empire who had defected to Ashikaga Yoshimasa's forces were secretly assassinated. After the incident, there was no clue at all. The identity of the murderer became a mystery, making the situation that seemed very clear become blurred again. The sudden assassination plan made Kobayakawa, who was prepared to take action, hesitate. His many years of experience told him that this matter was strange. If he didn't understand what was going on, he might regret it for the rest of his life if he made a decision casually. There were many people who had the same idea as Kobayakawa. After all, 6 people died in 3 days. If it was a coincidence, no one would believe it. Then the question was, why did they die? Why were they killed so quietly? Considering that these 6 people were born in different places, had different levels of power and influence, and were quite different in age, they all had one thing in common, which was that they had all opposed Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Now, they had changed to support him, which was very scary. Could it be that their action of going back on their words angered someone? From the looks of it, to be able to kill 6 people without leaving any evidence behind, just this point alone was not something an ordinary person could do. Could it be the Flatwell Field? After all, this person had stayed by the side of the emperor. More importantly, he was born in a ninja family. With such an inheritance, it was not strange that he could do such a thing. But could it really be him? Was he trying to warn others? The Flatwell Field, who was being speculated by everyone, was also secretly sad at this moment in Echi Prefecture of Hokuriku. The assassination was really not his doing. It was true that he was born in a ninja family, but no one knew better than him that the ninja masters of his family had long withered. The only one they could rely on was Kobayakawa, who always protected him. How could Flatwell Field, who no longer had the ability to threaten others and could only defend himself, do such a thing? For this reason, he specially called Kobayakawa to ask him about this matter. Kobayakawa, could it be someone who has a very good relationship with our family, or your former friends who couldn't stand it? No? After a little hesitation, Kobayakawa gave an answer. As if he found that Flatwell Field didn't believe it, he replied with a solemn face. If only 1 or 2 people died, it might be possible, but 6 people died at once. This is a bit unbelievable. You know, the ninja power of our family has long been declining. Even if they wanted to do it, I'm afraid they don't have the ability to do it. Kobayakawa's answer completely cut off Flatwell Field's idea. He sighed and said, Then who could it be? General, It shouldn't be the work of the Japanese Empire. Most of the ninja forces are now in the hands of Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He wouldn't do such a thing, and because of his existence, no one in the Japanese Empire has the strength and courage to do such a thing, so... Listening to Kobayakawa's analysis, Flatwellfield felt that he had grasped something. So you said that it's not the work of the Japanese Empire. Could it be Bugnam of Gojoseon? It's Bugnam of Gojoseon. It must be him. Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was in Hakurika's Ekizen prefecture, was roaring angrily in a large courtyard that he had just occupied not long ago. At first, like everyone else, he thought that the killer was Flatwellfield, who asked him to be his biggest enemy now, and at the same time, he also had a ninja background. But when he also called Matsumoto Kazuma, who was in charge of the ninja department, he ruled out the possibility that Flatwellfield was behind the scenes, and finally set the target on Yang Chenong. Chapter 1087. To be honest, after the eunuch sent by the Emperor of Ming announced the imperial edict, Ashikaga Yoshimasa had been waiting for Yang Chenong to negotiate with him. In his opinion, since the master behind him had already spoken, how could a mere king with a different surname not know when to advance or retreat? Then shouldn't he return the Shanyang path and even give up the Shihai path that he first occupied? Yang Chenong was a king with a different surname, and he was a king with a different surname with some strength. But so what? In Ashikaga Yoshimasa's eyes, since the Emperor of Ming had spoken, even the most powerful subjects had to back down. The imperial power of the great Ming dynasty was supreme, and he had never heard of a subject who dared to openly oppose it. Even if they wanted to rebel, they would have to think of all kinds of reasons, and then act in the name of protecting the king. This was the impression that the Han people had left on Ashikaga Yoshimasa. In a country that always followed morals and paid attention to propriety, justice, integrity, and shame, it was very difficult for a great hero to appear. Even if one appeared by chance, if he didn't follow the rules, it wouldn't take long for those who envied him to gang up and kill him. He had almost forgotten about the 5-star army that he no longer regarded as a match for. However, the sudden assassination of 6 people made him understand that this Bugnam of Gojoseon didn't seem to be afraid of the imperial power of the great Ming dynasty. At least, he was far more confident than he had imagined. When the result came out, even Ashikaga Yoshimasa was shocked. Could it be that he had to compete with this King Wenan of Daimyong? Of course, Ashikaga Yoshimasa wasn't afraid. After all, this was the territory of the Japanese Empire, and he had the support and recognition of the Emperor of Ming. His military strength and provisions were many times more than the 5-star army, so there was no reason for him to be afraid. If he had to say something, then it was to prevent the other party from assassinating him. After all, this kind of method could be used to deal with others, but who could guarantee that it wouldn't be used to deal with him? Kun Matsumoto, I will have to trouble you next. Please show your strength. If someone really dares to make a move against this great general, let them know that there are still the most powerful ninjas in the Japanese Empire. Since he had been praised, Matsumoto Kazuma really didn't have a reason to refuse. Not to mention that the ninjas behind him had to rely on the great general. After all, ninjas were born with martial arts first priority, first, second, and ignored other things like how they had to deal with ordinary people, and how to accumulate enough money to pay enough money for training and daily expenses. Now that the great general had spoken, Matsumoto Kazuma immediately nodded and said, "Hai, please rest assured, there will be no mistakes in your safety." Ashikaga Yoshimasa nodded with satisfaction, then turned his attention to how to deal with the opposing forces in the Flatwellfield. In his opinion, this was the most urgent thing to solve. As for the 6 people who were killed, they were just some nameless pawns, and they couldn't change the overall situation. After he calmed down the civil strife in the Japanese Empire, the 5-star army, as an outsider, would no longer need to stay here, so they would have to leave. It was naturally Yang Chenong's idea to kill them, and it was the Wolf Fang Special Forces that did it. When this Wolf Fang Special Forces was first established, they were set to complete beheadings and various other urgent tasks. However, killing 6 unsuspecting leaders of the Japanese Empire didn't take much effort. Coupled with the complete information from the intelligence department, it wasn't as simple as killing chickens, but in short, it wasn't that difficult. Today, the 5-star army was still stabilizing the Nankado area. Yang Qinong knew very well that without a stable rear, once they fought with the enemy, it would be a terrible thing, so the army couldn't move yet. Even so, the Wolf Fang Special Forces and the Ghost Shadow Assault Team came in handy at this moment. Continue to issue orders to them, let Wolf Fang and Ghost Shadow cooperate well and make them stand out. Sigh, we still don't have enough people. Yang Qidong sighed and said to Beta Persei beside him. Beta Persei liked to see the young master's domineering aura. After he laughed, he went out to find the reporter, Wang Shan. A new bloody storm unfolded one by one in the following time. After the 6 people were killed, on the 4th day, 2 more leaders who publicly supported Ashikaga Yoshimasa were killed. On the 5th day, 3 people were killed, and on the 6th day, 2 more people were killed. When the news continued to spread, not only did the forces who had originally said that they would stand up to support Ashikaga Yoshimasa stop all their actions, but some of the forces who had publicly supported Ashikaga Yoshimasa actually shouted slogans against it. But they just shouted. They didn't mean to attack the forces of the great general. Instead, after shouting, they went into hiding like a turtle. Smart people could see at a glance that they were just doing this to save their lives. It was just a gesture. But this gesture was enough to give Ashikaga Yoshimasa a headache. The deaths of those people were like slaps to his face, which made him feel ashamed and furious at the same time. They're going too far. Kun Matsumoto, please send experts to check how those people died. I really don't understand. Don't they know how to be vigilant? While cursing Yang Qindong's unscrupulous actions, Ashikaga Yoshimasa also hated those dead people. They didn't even have the strength to protect themselves. They really deserved to be killed. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was angry. He thought that he must find out the reason and then give a firm counterattack, because this is a serious provocation to him, the great general. Matsumoto Kazuma moved quickly. 3 days later, he returned to Ashikaga Yoshimasa with the results. He had already seen the bodies of the dead, so it was easy for him to find the gunshot wounds and the bullets that had entered their bodies. Oh? So they were killed by firearms from a distance? Listening to the report, Ashikaga Yoshimasa asked with some surprise. Yes. I have long heard that the firearms in the 5-star army are very advanced. Now it seems to be true. Matsumoto Kazuma nodded and admitted. The facts were in front of him. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's heart also gave birth to a trace of fear. After all, the unknown was the scariest. What if the 5-star army used the same method on him? What should he do? Would he be able to defend himself? Just as his face was constantly changing and uncertain, Matsumoto Kazuma on the side seemed to have seen something. He reported again and added, I have brought people to see it, and I have also done a professional investigation. The effective range of this firearm should be very far, but it is only about 600 meters. When these people died, the guards around them were concentrated on the periphery, which gave the shooter a chance. And if we can arrange more people to protect the Supreme General when you go out, and at the same time, the safe search range is 600 meters away, then no one can hurt the Supreme General, and these assassins sent by the 5-star army will not be able to succeed. This answer was exactly what Ashikaga Yoshimasa wanted to hear. After seeing that Matsumoto Kazuma had a specific arrangement, he smiled with satisfaction and said, Very good, I am happy to have a captain like you. It's just that some people must be punished when they make a mistake. Since you know what is done, then Kun Matsumoto should know what to do next. Matsumoto Kazuma quickly understood the meaning of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's words, and immediately replied, Supreme General, don't worry, I will arrange for the best ninjas to be dispatched, and we will definitely give the 5-star army a good lesson. For this result, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was very satisfied. He reached out and patted Matsumoto Kazuma's shoulder to show his affection. But what they didn't know was that the so-called musket could only shoot up to 600 meters away. This inference was correct. From this point of view, Matsumoto Fuma and his ninjas were quite capable. But the reason why the sniper rifle could shoot at such a close range was because it was a trap set by Tai Hu. The bullets were not shot from the sniper rifle, but from the ordinary Type 95. This was done to create an illusion and make them slack in their defense. Of course, this was a matter for the future. For now, they were preparing to take revenge on the 5-star army. Under Matsumoto Kazuma's personal selection, Kitamura, Yui Suzuki, and Kazuma were selected to be the hidden ninjas of the Mountain Sun Path. Ninjas were also divided into different levels. From bottom to top, they were trainee ninja, genin, chunin, jonin, and special ninja. Sending out 3 special ninjas at once was already the limit of what Matsumoto Kazuma could send out. This was because he only had 4 special ninjas on his side, including himself. This time, other than himself, the other 3 special ninjas were sent out. Only the 3 special ninjas were sent out, and there were no other ninjas to assist. Matsumoto Kazuma wanted to achieve the goal of being silent. He didn't want to send out too many people and leak the location of the ninjas. The 3 special ninjas were sent out in secret. Even with Yang Xie's intelligence department, they couldn't find any traces, but the relevant defensive measures had already been taken. After Yang Chendong sent out Wolf Fang and Ghost Shadow, he was prepared for a counterattack. The reason why his subordinates couldn't find anything was because the person who came was too strong. But this kind of strength might affect others, but it was nothing to Yang Chendong. Ever since Yang Chendong came to this era, not only did he have the help of the mysterious Daikara, but his strength was also constantly rising. Especially as Yang Xie's forces grew bigger and bigger, after he made a request, some famous martial artists were found and sent to Yang Chendong. After talking with these people, Yang Chendong's strength was also constantly rising, and he had already touched the threshold of half-step Grandmaster. Chapter 1088. At this time, Yang Chendong's perception of the outside world was more sensitive than before, especially his perception of danger. That kind of wonderful feeling could not be described with words. That wasn't the only aspect of his improvement. The strength and speed of his attacks had also improved by quite a bit. At the very least, when he fought with Yang Er and the other dragon guards, he was much more relaxed. Often, the moment he attacked, the dragon guards, who were known to be 1 in 1,000, would be unknowingly knocked to the ground. With such an improvement in personal strength, Yang Chendong was not only not afraid of the possible revenge of Ashikaga Yoshimasa, but also had a sense of eagerness. Another 10 days had passed, and the settlement of the Yang people in the Shan-Yang path was finally completed. The non-human people who were sent over from the various provinces were allocated to their own fields according to their population. Some businesses had also started to be established, and things that were closely related to the people such as grain stores and salt stores were also opened one after another. This had greatly stabilized the local situation and the hearts of the people. Not only that, the 4th Division and the 7th Army, who were ordered to come, had also arrived. After a short day of rest, they could accept the mission and attack the Japanese army at any time. A large number of rice grains were also being transported to the island on the transport ships. Yang Chendong put on the appearance of a protracted war. In fact, the Japanese Empire, which had a population of 12 million, was worth some effort. What Yang Chendong wanted was the population base here. If used well, it would become an excellent reserve warehouse for soldiers, which would solve many of his problems with the source of soldiers. Because of the geographical advantage, the Japanese Empire could be isolated in a corner. No matter what changes happened in the outside world, the development of the Japanese Empire could be carried out in an orderly manner. This could be seen from the fact that they had a population of 12 million, although they only had an area of less than 380,000 square kilometers. For example, Siam, which had been occupied by Yang Chendong, had an area of more than 510,000 square kilometers, but in terms of population, it was only 7 to 8 million. Naturally, Considering his hatred for this ethnic group, Yang Qindong did not rule out the possibility of using large firearms. Once he was angry, so what if he accepted fewer soldiers? He would teach this ethnic group, who bullied the weak and feared the strong, a lesson and let them know that they were just a small branch of Huaxia. Even if he wanted to take action, he would need a valid reason. After all, the previous peace treaty was still there. Yang Qindong already had a plan for this. He knew how to lead the outbreak of this war, but before he started, there was one more thing he needed to solve, and that was the killer sent by Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Although there was no evidence, and there was no information about the other party, Yang Qindong judged others by himself. He believed that Ashikaga Yoshimasa was not a person who was willing to suffer in silence, so the killer should have been sent out long ago. It was just that the action was secretive, and had not been discovered. It didn't matter. Huaxia had a long history, and it was very famous in the art of war. It had been translated into many languages, and this time Yang Qindong used one of the 36 stratagems, to lure the snake out of its hole. Beta Persei, go out for a walk with the young master. Yang Qindong had a relaxed expression as he changed into a loose green robe. Go out for a walk? Beta Persei's expression changed in an instant. He followed Yang Qindong every day, and he knew very well that Ashikaga Yoshimasa could send killers for revenge at any time. It was said that the commanders of the 5-star armies and above had extra protection around them. Then, as the leader and the core of the army, shouldn't Yang Qindong stay in the tent to be safe? Taking the initiative to go out was tantamount to asking for trouble. At this moment, Beta Persei stood still. Beta Persei's behavior was seen by Yang Qindong, but he didn't say anything. Perhaps he had already guessed that this would be the result, so he just smiled and then walked towards another big tent with Junko. Yang Qindong not only wanted to go out for a walk, but also wanted to take Junko with him. Did he really think that the ninjas of the Japanese Empire were vegetarians? Beta Persei panicked and wanted to dissuade him, but just as he moved, Yang Qindong's voice came from the other side. If you want to stop me, then stay in the big tent and guard the base camp. With just this sentence, Beta Persei became hesitant. It seems that Yang Qindong is a very democratic person, and he is willing to listen to everyone's opinions on some issues. In his words, 3 cobblers are better than 1 zhuge liang. This is also one of the reasons why everyone speaks in military and political meetings. Knowing the temper of the 6th young master, everyone has their own opinions, and once a good opinion is adopted, isn't it equal to entering the eyes of the 6th young master? At the same time, Yang Qindong is also stubborn on some things. If he decided on something, it would be very difficult for others to stop him. At the very least, it was not something that Yang Heir alone could do. Thinking that if he can't stop him, even the qualification to follow him will be deprived, Beta Persei obediently closed his mouth. But when Yang Qindong went to call Junko, he called the first guard Captain Chiu V and ordered him to send some of the most elite people to follow the young master. Beta Persei and Chiu V were already prepared, and what happened next was as they guessed. Yang Qindong didn't choose to take too many Long Wei, including Junko, her maid Miko, and Captain Kobayashi. There were only a dozen people in total, including Beta Persei and Captain Chiu V. More than a dozen horses walked out of the barracks unhurriedly, from the south to the north. The location chosen by the 5-star army was Misako Prefecture, and a little north from here was Boma Prefecture, which was the border between Shanyangdu and Ping in Beijing. The north of Misako Prefecture belonged to Boki Prefecture and Yinban City of Shanyangdu. It was the junction of the 3 places, and usually the public security was somewhat chaotic. Yang Qindong and the others chose a place called Shaoyin Mountain at the junction of the 3 places. It was said that it was warm in winter and cool in summer, and the climate was pleasant, and the environment was good. Yang Qindong took Junko out to enjoy the scenery, and also to relax during the war. Junko was very happy that Yang Qindong was willing to come out to play with her. She was as lively as a little girl on the horse. After leaving the barracks, her bell-like laughter could be heard all the way, spreading far and wide in the empty mountains. Yang Qindong looked at Junko's performance, and his eyes were full of a doting smile. He seemed to be in a good mood, but no one noticed the caution in his eyes from time to time, and the tension of his muscles. He was in a state where he was ready to go all out at any time. The group of more than a dozen people went all the way. Except for Beta Persei, Chio-V, and Kobayashi, the other long way spread out, keeping a distance of dozens of meters away from Yang Chendong and the other corps members to ensure that if there was any danger, they could warn them at any time. Although there were few people, the division of labor was clear, and each direction could be guaranteed to have one or two long way, which also greatly enhanced the sense of security. Yang Chendong and the others arrived at the foot of Shaoyin Mountain without any surprises or dangers. Here, they saw a spring that was flowing. Because of the geographical and environmental reasons, there were many springs in the Japanese Empire, which directly led to the development of the hot spring industry in the Japanese Empire. Therefore, the appearance of this spring was not unexpected. The moment she saw it, Junko happily got off the horse and came to the spring under the accompaniment of the maid Yoshiko. At this time, it was September, and the weather was still a little hot at noon. But when they came to the spring, a cool breeze blew on their faces, making Junko smile happily. She didn't forget to ask Yang Chendong to come down from the horse to share this cool breeze with her. Of course, Yang Chendong wouldn't refuse Junko's enthusiasm. He looked around casually, then slowly jumped off the white dragon horse. At the same time, he ordered Beta Persei and Chio-V. "Tell the brothers to rest for a while, don't be so nervous all the time." After the sixth young master spoke, Chio-V waved his hand, and the 10 long way immediately dismounted and found a cool place to rest for a while. At this moment, Yang Chendong also walked towards the spring with steady steps. But at this time, a sword light suddenly flew out from the dense forest in front of the spring. The target was Princess Junko, who was still squatting there with a happy face. The sword light came out of nowhere. It was so sudden that Junko, who was attacked, couldn't help but fall to the ground after letting out a scream. She could only watch as the sword light pierced towards her throat. At this critical moment, the maid Tomiko who was following beside her moved. She pulled out a soft sword from her waist and met the sword light head-on. The two collided and saved Tomiko from the butcher's knife. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the captain of the guards, Xiao Lin, had already rushed forward. Along with him was Yang Er, who had pulled out his sword. Even the captain of the Longwei First Squad, Chio-V, also brandished his sword. While calling people to protect the sixth young master, he also rushed towards the spring. Yoshiko blocked in time and saved Junko, but she couldn't win. She was stabbed in the shoulder, and blood stained her arm. Fortunately, Yang Er and Kobayashi arrived in time and took their places. The two of them fought with the ninja assassins who were dressed in tight black clothes that had suddenly appeared from the left and right. "Don't let him escape." Yang Chendong surprisingly didn't rush forward. Instead, under the protection of Tu Longwei, he stood in place and pointed at the ninja of the Japanese Empire. With his order, the other 8 Longwei formed an encirclement under the leadership of Chio-V, firmly surrounding the ninja of the Japanese Empire, cutting off all his escape routes. When things developed to this point, it seemed that everything was going very smoothly. The ninja who appeared looked like he would be captured if he didn't die. There was no way out. Especially under the full counterattack of Beta Persei and Kobayashi, the two of them gradually gained the upper hand. Chapter 1089. Whoosh! Just when everyone's attention was focused on the spring, another sword light suddenly appeared. Unexpectedly, it went straight for Yang Chendong, who was standing 30 meters away from the spring. The appearance of the sword light did indeed catch everyone off guard. At least the two Longwei who were protecting Yang Chendong were not fully prepared. Just a moment ago, their eyes were still on the spring. Who would have thought that a new sword light would appear, and the target would be them? However, no matter how sudden the sword light was, the two Longwei instinctively blocked in front of Yang Chendong with their swords. They only had one goal. Even if they had to die, they could not let the sixth young master get hurt. Otherwise, they did not deserve to be a member of the Longwei. Get out of the way! The two Longwei instinctively wanted to use their bodies to block the sixth young master and complete their mission. Because of their panic, they were a little unsteady and exposed a flaw in their defense. Yang Qindong, who was protected behind them, saw this scene clearly. So at the critical moment, he shouted and pushed the two Long Wei who were blocking in front of him gently with his palms. This push made the two of them walk around the gates of hell. At the last moment, they did not use their bodies as shields. However, while Yang Qindong saved the two Long Wei, he also exposed himself to the sword light. He watched as the cold sword essence pierced towards his throat. Qiu Vi, who had already turned his attention to this dangerous scene, saw it. He was so nervous that his heart almost jumped out of his chest. If anything happened to the sixth young master, even if he was only slightly injured, he would not be able to atone for his sins. And once he was stabbed by this sword, he was afraid that it would not be as simple as a small injury. If something really happened to him, he would become Yang Xia's sinner. Thinking of this, Qiu Vi shouted and desperately rushed forward. He only hoped that the sixth young master's injury would be less serious, so that even if he died, he could die with a smile on his face. Everyone was stunned, and Junko, who had been rescued, cried out in alarm. The sword was getting closer and closer to Yang Qindong's throat, and there was no way to dodge it. Yang Qindong looked very calm in the face of this fatal sword strike. There was no trace of panic in his eyes. When the sword was less than half a fist away from his throat, he suddenly jumped up and retreated, as if he had been pulled by a wire and was shooting a movie. The ninja who attacked didn't expect such a result. He was even prepared that Yang Qindong would dodge, and if his first attack failed, he would make the second attack. But he didn't expect that this person could retreat in the air. This was many times more difficult than moving in the air. At least with his strength, he could not do this. The ninja of the Japanese Empire was chasing, and Yang Qindong was retreating. The two of them were in a stalemate. Seeing this scene, Qiu Vi breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time, he also accelerated his pace. He wanted to catch up and then give a fatal blow to the ninja of the Japanese Empire. Qiu Vi was still running forward with all his strength. There were 6 Long Wei beside him. They were also chasing with all their strength. They wanted to save the 6th young master. However, the third sword light that followed completely disrupted their plans. No one knew when the third ninja appeared, but he successfully blocked Qiu Vi's group of 7. Not only that, when he suddenly appeared, he also injured 2 Long Wei who were trying to catch up to Yang Qindong. The appearance of the third ninja of the Japanese Empire was like the appearance of a dangerous mountain pass. He blocked Qiu Vi's group, who wanted to save them. This was equivalent to cutting off all of Yang Qindong's support. 3 special ninjas. This was the strongest lineup of assassins under the Ashikaga Yoshimasa organization. Except for the captain and the boss, Matsumoto Kazuma, who didn't appear, the other 3 all appeared. The first one to attack was Kitamura, the second one to attack Yang Qindong was the strongest of the 3, and the last one to block Qiu Vi's group was Suzuki Yui. The 3 of them worked together, and appeared without any warning. Even if they wanted to assassinate Ashikaga Yoshimasa, they had at least a 70% chance of success. And that was under the condition that the other party had a tight defense. Not to mention that Yang Qindong only had a dozen people around him. In their opinion, their target was dead for sure. Yang Qindong kept dodging. He looked a little embarrassed, but he always managed to dodge the sharp sword at the last moment. This was the real Yang Qindong. Maybe because his dodging posture wasn't very good, or maybe because the plan was going very smoothly, no one noticed why they still haven't killed the target after so long. The 3 special ninjas were completely immersed in the joy of being able to make a great contribution. On the other hand, Yang Qindong looked very flustered from the beginning to the end, but if one observed carefully, one would notice that he didn't counterattack at all. All of his actions looked very flustered, but it was also very strange. For example, why didn't he rush forward when he saw Junko being assassinated? Why did he just stand there? For example, why didn't he counterattack when he was being assassinated? Was he really only dodging? According to human instinct, he should at least draw his sword and fight back. Yang Qindong didn't do anything, he just kept dodging and looking around. Yes, Yang Chenong was using this opportunity to observe everything around him. Before he could confirm whether there were only 3 assassins or not, and whether there were other backup plans, he wouldn't act rashly. The reason was that he didn't want to alert the enemy. This was where Yang Chenong's confidence came from. He had already touched the threshold of the supreme power realm. That was the reason why he still walked out of the military camp with Junko, even though he knew that Ashikaga Yoshimasa would probably do the same to him after he sent someone to assassinate Junko. Some methods were not only used by him, others could also learn and use them. In order not to let the officers under his command become the target of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's anger, Yang Chenong stepped forward bravely, and used himself as the bait. Everything was as he expected. The appearance of the 3 special ninjas was satisfactory, otherwise, Yang Chenong would really have to worry about the safety of the low-level officers. Now that the assassins had appeared, what he needed to do was to determine whether there were other enemies around. With his 5 senses, which had already touched the threshold of a Grand Master, it was easy for him to get a clear picture of the situation nearby. After confirming that he did not sense any new auras, he was basically certain that only the 3 killers had come. Ha! Yang Chenong, who was constantly dodging, suddenly smiled. This Ashikaga Yoshimasa was still very confident. Did he really think that only 3 ninjas could hurt him? At this moment, he was laughing at the opponent's arrogance and presumption. But this kind of smile was seen by Blowing Ishida, who was holding a ninja sword, and it gave him a bad feeling. Instinctively, he shouted, "Baka! Fuck you!" Yang Chenong quickly replied. Then, without knowing when, a gun appeared in his right hand. He even made a shooting gesture towards Yoshimasa. Although he didn't know how powerful this gun was, Yoshimasa already knew the power of firearms from the information he received from the 5-star army. When he saw the gun being taken out, his body instinctively stopped, and he even made a dodging gesture. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yang Chenong fired a shot into the sky. Immediately, a red light appeared. It was the appearance of a signal flare. Yang Chenong took this opportunity to send out a signal of his location. He knew that there were people who wanted to harm him, so how could he not be prepared? There were 200 people from the Wolf Fang Special Forces waiting near Shaoying Mountain, but because they were afraid of being discovered by the assassins, they hid far away. The signal was sent out in order to prevent these 3 people from escaping. Since they wanted to kill him, then they should be prepared to be killed. Of course, Yang Chenong wouldn't really kill them, because they were far more convincing dead than alive. This was also one of the reasons why Yang Chenong didn't take out his gun to kill them. He wanted to keep them alive. The other reason was that Yang Chenong also wanted to test his own understanding of martial arts. Although he had Beta Persei and Long Way to practice, they were still his own people. He couldn't be ruthless. How could he have such an opportunity? It would be more satisfying to have a good enemy as a target. He put the signal flare back on his waist. At this moment, Yang Chenong's aura changed. When he looked at Yoshimasa, there was a hint of mockery in his eyes. He even made a beckoning gesture with his finger. His provocation was very strong. 8. Seeing that Yang Chenong was ignoring him, Yoshimasa was angry. After cursing, he suddenly rushed forward. At this moment, he perfectly used the advantage of a ninja's speed. He covered a distance of 3 or 4 meters in one step, instantly closing the distance between him and Yang Chenong. Yoshimasa was fast enough, but Yang Chenong's reaction was even faster. His body had already changed when the other party cursed. When the sword pierced through, it naturally pierced nothing. Then, he felt a pain in his left shoulder and couldn't help but grimace. Yang Chenong finally started to fight back. He patted Yoshimasa's shoulder. It seemed that he didn't use much strength, just a light pat, but Yoshimasa knew that his shoulder was broken. This is the difference between hard skills and internal strength. It can also be said to be the difference between external strength and internal strength. At Yang Chenong's level, although he couldn't use a branch as a sword to fight against all things, he could still turn his strength into internal strength and hit it out. Chapter 1090. Fortunately, he was a ninja, and a very good one at that. He could endure pain that normal people couldn't, so he didn't cry out in pain. Instead, he endured the pain and continued to swing his sword. He wanted to kill Yang Chenong to avenge his broken arm. Even when he was in perfect condition, he couldn't hurt Yang Chenong at all. Not to mention, he was suffering from internal injuries, so it was impossible for him to hurt Yang Chenong. Next, Yang Chenong kept drawing his sword, thrusting his sword, swinging his sword, chopping his sword, and picking up his sword. Yang Chenong just waited until the moment when the sword light appeared and casually dodged it. From time to time, he would hit forward. But even so, after more than a dozen rounds, his whole body was trembling. This wasn't because of anger, but because of pain. After 7 to 8 hits, each hit would leave a heavy injury on his body. And this was because Yang Chenong didn't want to kill and wanted to keep him alive. Otherwise, even if he had 3 lives, he wouldn't be able to survive. Clang! The ninja's sword fell to the ground without any warning when Yang Chenong hit his right arm again. As the sword fell to the ground, Blowashi also knelt on the ground. At this moment, he felt that his whole body was falling apart. Every movement required a lot of effort and strength. In this state, even if he was facing a normal 5-star army soldier, let alone Yang Chenong, who was half a grandmaster, he wouldn't be able to kill him. Blowashi knelt on the ground, and Yang Chenong didn't even look at him. He walked past him with an indifferent expression and headed towards Yu Suzuki, who was blocking Cho Wu and the others. Although Yu Suzuki's back was facing Yang Chenong most of the time, his ninja's sharp senses allowed him to observe the situation from time to time. So much time had passed. He really wanted to angrily scold Blowing Rock. Why hadn't they taken care of the target yet? What were they doing? But before he could say anything, Haishiya suddenly knelt on the ground. Yang Chenong also walked past him. Yui Suzuki knew that Kurosawa did not complete the mission, but he did not have the time to think about the reasons. A glimmer of light appeared in his eyes. Upon closer inspection, there was even a hint of excitement because the target was walking towards him. Didn't that mean that his opportunity to make a great contribution had arrived? Among the 3 people who came, Blowing Stone's strength was the strongest. But in truth, the 3 of them were on par with each other in terms of strength. Ishida was just more proficient in quick attacks, while Yu Suzuki was more proficient in strength. Ninjas were particular about sudden appearance, killing with 1 blow, and then leaving in a huff. The requirement for strength had never been high, which was why Suzuki was slightly weaker than the others. But he had never thought of it that way. In his mind, having more strength would give him an advantage in many aspects. For example, if both of them attacked with the same sword, the one with more strength would obviously have the advantage. This was also the reason why he did not want to submit to Blowing Stone. He always thought that if he chose to be a samurai, he would definitely be much stronger than Blowing Stone. But in some things, just thinking was not enough. One needed to prove everything with facts. In Yui Suzuki's eyes, Yang Chenong's approach was an opportunity to prove herself. He suppressed the excitement in his heart, and acted as if he was still fighting with Chiu Vi and the others. He acted as if he did not notice Yang Chenong's approach and left his back to him. Closer. 10 steps, 8 steps, 5 steps, 3 steps. When he was only 3 steps away, Yu Suzuki suddenly turned around and slashed with his ninja sword. Under the support of his powerful strength, the sound of wind whistling could be heard. At this moment, Yu Suzuki was confident that even if there was a tree in front of him, he would be able to cut it in half. You're courting death. Yu Suzuki suddenly gave up on him and the others and attacked the 6th young master, causing Chiu Vi and the other Longwei members to shout. They shouted and slashed at Yu Suzuki's back. Yu Suzuki acted as if he did not hear them. In the eyes of a ninja, there was only the mission. As long as the assassination mission was completed, what was a little injury? On the contrary, it was a military medal that could be used to prove one's strength. With excitement in his eyes, the ninja's sword slashed across Yang Chenong's neck. At this moment, Yu Suzuki's face revealed a smile. It was the excitement and joy of completing the mission, but more than that, it was the joy of proving one's strength. The sword flashed and slashed across Yang Chendong's neck. This scene also shocked Xiao Vi and the others who were rushing over. The sixth young master had actually been injured under their protection right under their noses. Based on this alone, their lives as dragon guards had come to an end. From now on, not only would they no longer be envied by others, but they would also have to live with shame for the rest of their lives. This was something they did not want to see. At this moment, they only wanted to kill Yu Suzuki, so what if they had to pay with their lives? At least, they could use their deaths to prove their loyalty. Several blades slashed at him from behind, and Yu Suzuki was already prepared to dodge. After all, he was a ninja, and his reaction speed had always been very fast. But what happened next made him stop for a moment. And it was this moment that gave Xiao Vi and the others the opportunity to attack, causing him to suffer several blade wounds and fall to the ground. There was only one reason why Yu Suzuki stood there like a fool. After the sword was slashed, there was no resistance, and no blood was spilled. It was as if he had slashed through the air, but he clearly saw the sword slashing through the target's throat. What the hell is going on? No one knows, and no one will know what is the limit of Yang Chendong's speed right now. Because just now, because his speed was too fast, there was actually an afterimage. That ninja sword was just an afterimage, but because it was too fast, it actually gave people a very real feeling. Yang Chendong, who used his extreme speed, appeared next to Yu Suzuki. But he didn't take the opportunity to attack. Xiao Vi and the other Longwei ninjas had already attacked. He already knew the result. Leave him alive! After saying those words, Yang Chendong had already leaped over here and quickly rushed towards the last ninja, who was standing at the entrance of the North Village. Kitamura's strength wasn't bad. Not only did he injure Kobayashi, but he also forced the other two Longwei ninjas to retreat. If Beta Persei hadn't been pestering him, he would have already left this place. With only Beta Persei as his opponent, Kitamura was very relaxed. Speaking of which, in terms of overall strength, Kitamura wasn't Beta Persei's opponent. For example, when it comes to fighting on the battlefield, they weren't even on the same level. In other words, Beta Persei's Kung Fu was an open strategy, focused on opening and closing. On the other hand, Kitamura's Kung Fu was a conspiracy, focused on speed, accuracy, and surprise attacks. When a hero meets an assassin, it's easy to imagine that the former would be very aggrieved, having a feeling of powerlessness. Beta Persei was like that. Although he was already using a lot of strength, every time he was about to press down on his opponent, Bei Quanku only needed to increase his speed to dodge nimbly and return to safety. He could even pose a certain threat to Yang Er. On the battlefield, Yang Er had followed Yang Chendong to this day. Everywhere he passed, there were piles of bones of the enemy. All of them were pointed at by the weapons, and no one could stop them. But when facing an opponent like Kitamura, who didn't want to fight him head-on, he felt powerless. This made him unable to help but yell to vent his grievances. While Beta Persei was yelling and shouting like he was going crazy, Kitamura continued to fight while paying attention to the changes in the battlefield. Especially when his target was killed, Chua Shur knelt on the ground without any warning. Then, after a brief moment of shock, Yu Suzuki was injured by Longwei and subdued on the ground. All of these changes happened so quickly that it was completely beyond Kitamura's imagination. Just as he was wondering what was going on, Yang Chendong, dressed in green, was already 5 meters in front of him. Although there was still a distance of 5 meters between them, the North Village entrance could already feel the presence of danger from the pressure. After 2 of his companions were subdued, he already knew that this mission was impossible to complete. What he needed to do now was to leave this place immediately. Puff! A white smoke suddenly appeared without warning, and then Kitamura, who was standing between Yang Chendong and Beta Persei, suddenly disappeared into thin air. It was as if no one had ever been there. Huh! The scene in front of him shocked Beta Persei. He had only heard about ninjas before, but this was the first time he saw what happened. On the other hand, Yang Chendong's face didn't change at all. As early as in his previous life, in order to complete various missions, he had fought with ninjas more than once. But at that time, technology was extremely advanced, and the ninja's advantage had gradually declined. A single sentence could decide everything. Can a person be faster than a bullet? Especially with all kinds of surveillance equipment, all kinds of special glasses, it was very difficult to hide in thin air. But now, the ninja's method of hiding using light and sound waves was very powerful. At least, young Qindong needed some time to find the other party's trace. Fortunately, it was daytime, and there wasn't much cover. With his extraordinary experience, Yang Qindong quickly locked on to the direction. Suddenly, he pointed to a big tree 10 meters away from the spring and said, "He's there, hiding in the tree." Chapter 1091. This shout attracted everyone's attention. Soon, everyone found a faint shadow on the big tree. If it wasn't Bei Guku who had just disappeared, who else could it be? Bei Siyuan did not expect that he would still be discovered even though he had used everything he could and even increased his speed. At this moment, he suddenly had a bad feeling. He was afraid that not only would he fail to kill his target this time, but he might also be in danger. Knowing that both of his companions had been captured, he had to leave. At least, he had to report what happened here to the higher-ups so that they could make some preparations. Therefore, he had to leave. Since his position had been exposed, Bei Siyuan did not need to use any fancy means to hide his whereabouts. He simply jumped from this tree to a nearby tree, looking like a gibbon. "Chase, we can't let him escape." Beta Persei saw that Bei Siyuan wanted to escape. He angrily took out a Type 54 pistol from his waist and prepared to lead his men into the dense forest. "No need." Beta Persei, who was about to leave, was suddenly stopped by someone. He was just about to curse when he saw that the person who stopped him was Yang Qindong. He stood there obediently. Then the young master's voice clearly entered his ears. "Don't worry, he can't run away." Yang Qindong said this because he had discovered something. With his powerful 5 senses, he had already heard footsteps coming from the dense forest, and there was more than one. Although those people were very careful, Yang Qindong still caught them. Since they could appear here at this time, they should not be enemies. Otherwise, they would have attacked them instead of choosing to be defeated one by one. There was only one possibility left, and that was the Langia Special Forces who had rushed here after seeing the signal flare. There were 200 Langia Special Forces just to deal with a ninja in the forest where they were best at. Yang Qindong really had no reason to think that they could not catch him. What he had to do now was to stand there and wait for news. In less than a quarter of an hour, the sound of footsteps came from the dense forest. A burly man appeared in the lead. It was King Kong of the Wolf Fang. "Greetings, Liu Bai. We have already caught him. He is very fast and agile." Without any other choice, the team members could only use the crossbow. Both of his legs were pierced through. As soon as King Kong appeared, he gave a simple report of the situation. Then, 2 members of the team threw North Village entrance, who had been shot in both legs, onto the ground like dragging a dead dog. Hee. Seeing that the last killer was taken down, Yang Qindong was very happy. "Thank you for your hard work, brothers. Now do one more thing. Pull out all their molars immediately." Yang Qindong, who has long known the habits of ninjas, will never give the 3 people a chance to commit suicide. They are of great use. As a parasitic ninja who has always been attached to other forces, he has always had an idea, that is, he hopes that one day, he can break all the shackles, no longer rely on others, and he can stand on his own and stand alone. For this goal, I don't know how many seniors have worked hard and struggled for a lifetime, but in the end, no one has been able to do it. All of this has a lot to do with the special training of ninja. To become a qualified ninja, it takes not only hard work and effort, but also a mentality that requires one to be undistracted, not to be disturbed by everything, and to be able to devote oneself to it wholeheartedly. Only in this way can a truly excellent ninja be trained. It's just that people eat grains, how can they have no feelings and don't come into contact with worldly things? Just like ninjas, although their physical fitness is different from ordinary people, they still have to eat after all. They are not ascetics. In order to ensure physical coordination and absolute health, their requirements for food will only be higher. Otherwise, how can a malnourished person be trained for nearly 8 hours a day? And all of this requires money, a lot of money. And training ninja also requires a process, and for some people, this process is still very long. This has led to the fact that this is an industry with a large investment and slow results, and there are very few people who are interested in it. There are even fewer people who are interested and have enough financial strength and patience. This is also the reason why, with the financial resources of the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, he can only train 4 special ninjas, and the entire Japanese Empire only has 5 special ninjas. It's really because the external conditions don't allow it, and it's not that ninjas don't have to do their best. It is precisely because the number of suitable ninjas is too small that they have become even weaker, so that they don't have enough confidence to speak in the face of any forces. In order to change this situation, Matsumoto Kazuma took the initiative to take the task of assassinating Yang Chenong, in order to make a bang, so that everyone can see the power of their ninja. But it was apparent that things weren't going as smoothly as he imagined. In order to save the ninja's face, Matsumoto Kazuma didn't dare to tell the Supreme General about the loss of contact with the Kitamura trio. In the face of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's urging several times, he didn't tell the truth. Perhaps because there is no progress, or perhaps because Matsumoto Kazuma's lack of confidence was seen in the eyes of Ashikaga Yoshimasa, gradually he stopped putting his hope in the ninja, and didn't do anything to urge him. But the more this is the case, the more uncomfortable Matsumoto Kazuma's mood became. He felt a sense of abandonment. When a person is no longer valued by others and becomes a dispensable existence, all his dreams and ambitions will only get further and further away from the day of realization, so much so that Matsumoto Fujima became somewhat decadent, giving up the principles of ninja, and drinking all day long. On this day, Matsumoto Kazuma woke up drunk. Slowly opening his eyes, he found that he fell asleep in the hall. He couldn't help but shake his head with a wry smile. When did he become like this? Where did the previous righteous Matsumoto Kazuma go? He wanted to cheer up again, but when he thought of the Kitamura trio in his mind, there was no news, not even a little bit of news. The feeling of wanting to cheer up disappeared. If something really happened to them, would he be able to lead the ninjas to stand up again? If even the strongest ninja can't complete the task, then what hope does this organization have? What's the point of standing in this world? Shaking his head, Matsumoto Kazuma took a bottle of wine and poured it into his mouth. He wanted to use alcohol to comfort his wounded soul. Although the degree of wine in the Japanese Empire is not high, for him who has no experience in drinking, it is enough to numb his nerves. After pouring a third of the bottle of wine into his mouth, Matsumoto Kazuma felt a slightly spicy taste. The corner of his mouth revealed a satisfied smile. He really didn't know what else to do besides drinking. Clang! The loud sound of the door opening aroused Matsumoto Kazuma's vigilance. This is the ninja courtyard. According to the ninja's behavior, even the lowest genin walks quietly. It is absolutely impossible to make such a big noise when opening the door. This noise also attracted Matsumoto Kazuma's attention. Just when he was about to get up and go outside to see what is going on, the sound of sword clashing entered his ears, and then the door of his bedroom was pushed open, and 4 ninjas rushed in. "Kun Matsumoto, we are surrounded. It is the Supreme General's samurai team. Some of our companions have died in the courtyard. You should leave quickly." A man, who is slightly taller than the ordinary people of the Japanese Empire, walked out of the crowd. He is 1.78 meters tall and has a strong aura. His appearance is very dazzling for the people who are less than 1.7 meters tall. The man walked out in large strides, and when Matsumoto Kazuma saw him, he couldn't help but stare at him and said, "Yamaguchi-kun, you came in person?" Yamaguchi Fukada, Ninja General Ashikaga Yoshimasa's bodyguard, and also the captain of the samurai team. He is one of the most trusted people of the Ninja General. Oftentimes, His appearance and actions could directly represent the Supreme General, which was why Matsumoto Fuma was so surprised. Looking at Yamaguchi Fukada, Matsumoto Kazuma couldn't help but think, is all of this really the ninja general's idea? Yes, I came in person. Since Kun Matsumoto is here, can you ask your ninjas to stop first? I also know that you must have a lot of questions, so you can come with me to see the ninja general, and if you have any questions, you can talk to him face to face. Yamaguchi Fukada said with a very reasonable appearance, and his words were full of consideration for the other party. These words moved Matsumoto Kazuma. Although he is very sad about the hundreds of ninjas who have fallen to the ground and died, he wants to know the reason. So after hearing these words, he bowed deeply to Yamaguchi Fukada, who is more than 10 meters away, and said, "Thank you, Yamaguchi-kun. Since that is the case, I am willing to go with you to see the ninja general and make things clear." "Kun Matsumoto, you can't!" The 4 jonin behind him shouted anxiously. Since the samurai has already made a move on the ninjas, this is originally the result of a fight to the death. How can they easily believe the other party? Enough, don't say any more. I believe in Yamaguchi-kun's character. I am willing to go with them to see the ninja general. Matsumoto Kazuma waved his hand. In order to show his sincerity, he also took out his ninja sword and handed it to a jonin behind him, then turned around to show that he has no more weapons. Matsumoto Kazuma's sincerity is already full, but Yamaguchi Fukada on the opposite side seems to be not satisfied. Instead, he said, "And the medicine bottle on your body, take it out. I don't want you to go to the ninja general and play tricks." The so-called medicine bottle refers to the auxiliary substance used by ninjas to perform ecstasy jutsu and other means. Just like a cloud of smoke, the ninja will disappear. This is the function of the medicine bottle. The thing inside can make light have a certain chemical reaction for a while, thus achieving the goal of helping them escape. Since they are old rivals, how can Yamaguchi Fukada not know what other things Matsumoto Kazuma has? So he said, "Okay, I will hand them all over." Yamaguchi Fukada suddenly made a move, showing the neon people's untrustworthiness, insidious, and cunning. His men, who had already put down their katanas, also made a move. They didn't even need anyone to give the order. The sharp blades slashed at the ninjas who had already aimed at them. This sudden turn of events was out of everyone's expectations. Most of the ninjas were still sitting on the ground, or enjoying the help of their companions, but they were already killed by the katana. The situation instantly became one-sided. In just a few breaths, no less than dozens of ninjas were killed because they were unprepared. Why is this? Matsumoto Fujita covered the katana on his waist and stared at Yamaguchi Fujita in front of him with a pair of disbelieving eyes. Why? At this moment, Yamaguchi Fukada no longer had a smile on his face, but returned to a cold state and said, "Because of the incompetence of your ninjas, the assassination failed, and you were captured alive. Now the 5-star army has declared war on the Supreme General. Now their vanguard army is about to reach Ping in Beijing, and this place is about to fall into the hands of others. Was such a big mistake, do you think the Supreme General will forgive you? Why do you think this is?" In a short period of time, Yamaguchi Fukada continuously threw out so many questions and truths, making Matsumoto Kazuma stand there. For a while, he was at a loss. The assassination of the 3 ninjas at the north entrance of the village really failed, but why were they captured alive? Even if they couldn't escape, they should have died. Their teeth are highly poisonous. How could they be captured alive? Chapter 1093. After telling the answer, Yamaguchi Fukada looked at his old opponent Matsumoto Kazuma's painful expression and couldn't help but laugh proudly. This time, he didn't only want his opponent's life, but he also wanted his opponent's despair. Only in this way can he be considered to have defeated his opponent. After laughing, Yamaguchi Fukada once again raised the butcher's knife in his hand. Looking at his appearance, it was clear that he wanted to continue to chop down and end his opponent's life. "Kun Matsumoto, quickly leave!" A figure suddenly rushed over, and when the knife fell, it was chopped on the figure. Looking carefully, it was one of the 4 ninjas who persuaded Kuroda to leave. He used his body to block the knife, giving Matsumoto Kazuma a glimmer of hope to survive. The knife fell, but it didn't hit Matsumoto Kazuma's body. Yamaguchi Fukada's eyes showed a trace of anger. He pulled out the knife and slashed again, but he lost the opportunity to kill, because the other 3 ninjas rushed over. 2 of them waved their swords to block the knife, and the other ninja carried the stunned Matsumoto Kazuma and jumped toward the courtyard. Obviously, he wanted to take him away from here. Want to leave? Yamaguchi Fukada's face didn't show any panic. Obviously, he was very familiar with ninjas, so he was already prepared. He smiled and waved his right hand. The moment he waved his hand, 200 shadows suddenly appeared around the courtyard. They were wearing samurai clothes, and they were holding strong bows and crossbows in their hands. Their standard and uniform movements proved that they were a well-trained army. When 200 shadows appeared, many ninjas' eyes showed a look of horror. Some people couldn't help but shout, "My God, Divine Archery Battalion!" The Divine Archery Battalion was composed of the best archers in the Japanese army. They not only have nearly 100% accuracy in archery, but also undergo strict physical training. According to the founder of this army, General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, this army must be able to use bows and arrows, and use swords to kill the enemy. The requirements were too harsh, so it has been established for a long time, but the number of people has not been very sufficient, only 500. It became a trump card in the hands of the general, and he won't act rashly. What Kuroda didn't expect is that this time, in order to deal with ninjas, he actually dispatched 200 people. It seems that this time Kuroda is really angry, and he wants to destroy this ninja unit that he used to be proud of. When he saw that it was the Divine Archery Battalion, Matsumoto Kazuma, who had a knife in his stomach, stopped the idea of continuing to escape. Originally, he was injured, and it was difficult for him to move, so the chance of escaping was very slim. Now, there were fully prepared divine archers on the periphery. Doesn't this mean that the inescapable net has been set up, and even if he wanted to escape, there would be no chance for him to escape? Instead of being killed while escaping, it was better to stay and fight, and die together with his brothers. At least he can gain a reputation for loyalty. Matsumoto Kazuma pulled back his hand and said to the jonin who was helping him to leave, "Forget it, there is no chance. It is better to fight with all our strength, and kill a few more people is equivalent to revenge for our brothers." The jonin didn't speak. At this moment, he didn't know what to say. Yes, since the Divine Archery Battalion has appeared, how can there be a chance for them to escape? Since he was going to die, he might as well go all out before he died. One was an injured special ninja, and the other was a jonin. The two were holding ninja swords back to back. They relied on each other, but at the same time, they also turned their backs to each other. They were ready to kill the enemy at any time. Matsumoto Kazuma stopped running, and Yamaguchi Fukada laughed proudly. Is this old opponent finally going to accept his fate? Does he really think that death will be so easy? No! He wants to watch this old opponent die step by step. Even if he dies, he won't let this old enemy die easily. Yamaguchi Fukada, who was laughing, showed a gloomy look on his face. After that, he made a gesture, and most of the 200 soldiers of the Divine Archery Battalion adjusted the angle and target of their arrows, leaving only 20 people to stare at Matsumoto Kazuma. Matsumoto Kazuma saw the excitement of the soldiers of the Divine Archery Battalion, and he had a bad feeling, so he exclaimed loudly, "No! Don't!" As if to confirm his guess, as soon as his shout fell, hundreds of arrows broke through the air and shot toward those ninjas who were desperately resisting in the courtyard. Originally, they were in a disadvantageous position. After being attacked suddenly and being schemed by Yamaguchi Fukada, the number of ninjas has sharply decreased, and only 1/3 of their strength was left. The arrival of this wave of arrows accelerated the process of their death. Especially in front of them, there were samurai who were entangled with them, so they couldn't do anything to dodge. Many ninjas were killed by the arrows. The archers of the Divine Archery Battalion were worthy of their title. Every arrow was shot with a very clear target, and they could bypass the samurai and hit the ninjas. They were either killed by an arrow in a vital part of their body or pierced into their arms or legs, reducing their mobility and agility. With just one wave of arrows, at least 50 ninjas died tragically on the ground, and dozens of others suffered different degrees of injuries. This made the situation worse for the ninjas, who were already in a bad situation, and even their resistance became weaker. "No! Don't! I'll fight with you!" Watching the ninjas he trained hard and his companions who have been with him for many years being shot one by one under his eyes, Matsumoto Fuma's eyes were red, as if they were about to spit out flames. He wanted to kill all the enemies. In anger, Matsumoto Kazuma completely ignored the knife wound on his abdomen. Even if he was injured, a special ninja was still a special ninja. Like a cold wind, he killed his way into the samurai who were showing off their might, and then stabbed his sword to the left and right. One by one, the samurai who were unprepared, or who were prepared but had no power to fight back, became sheep in the lion's mouth, became the target, and were stabbed to death on the ground. Originally, he had a face full of laughter, imagining how painful it would be for Matsumoto Kazuma to watch his subordinates and companions die one by one. Suddenly, when he saw this person move and kill several of his subordinates, the smile on his face disappeared, and was replaced by anxiety and anger. A person who was about to die, an ant that he could trample to death at any time, dared to resist. This was unacceptable. Yamaguchi Fukada roared, and then rushed toward Matsumoto Kazuma with his sword. At the same time, he didn't forget to make a shooting gesture toward the surrounding walls. The expressions of the 20 God Arrow Battalion and the Master Archers were also very ugly. Originally, they thought that Matsumoto Kazuma was already a fat piece of meat on the chopping board, and they could decide his life and death as they wished. But they didn't expect that he dared to resist, and in such a short time, he even killed 2 samurai. This was simply a provocation to their archery skills. "Release the arrows." A captain couldn't help but shout in his heart, and the arrows of the 20 master archers also moved along with Matsumoto Kazuma's movements. The advantage of ninjas was their flexibility and the strangeness of their figure. When it came to face-to-face combat, they were not as good as samurai. This was also the reason why ninjas were always suppressed in a head-on battle. But when they were able to fully exert their advantages, like Matsumoto Kazuma now, who was constantly moving among the samurai like a civet, it was impossible to completely capture his figure. The archers finally found a chance to shoot a few arrows, but not only did most of them miss, but one arrow even hit a samurai's body, accidentally injuring one of their own. Matsumoto Kazuma's speed was so fast that it was beyond his usual level. He also saw that the wound on his lower abdomen was constantly dripping blood, and he knew that if this continued, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to live long, even if others didn't kill him. Since he knew that he was going to die, what was there to be afraid of? He just had to give it his all and kill as many people as he could. It could also be considered as an explanation to his brothers as a captain. At least if they could be together after death, he wouldn't be ashamed of anyone. Matsumoto Kazuma, who was close to madness, became synonymous with the Grim Reaper. Wherever he passed, samurai fell to the ground. Most people only saw a shadow appear, and then they felt a pain in their body and lost their senses forever. Because of Matsumoto Kazuma, the courtyard became more and more chaotic. Originally, it was only a one-sided battle, but now it became a situation where everyone could become prey. At this moment, on another high wall 500 meters away from the courtyard, a group of black-clothed men were lying there, as if they were a layer of black tiles on the roof of the courtyard. If it wasn't for someone speaking at this time, no one would be able to tell that everything in front of them was made of human bodies. "General, please save our comrades, and our captain, he's about to die." With an anxious expression, Chushiki used his binoculars to see everything clearly, and finally couldn't hold it in and begged. At this moment, Chushiki wasn't interested in asking what the binoculars in his hands were, or how it could close the distance between them. Right now, he only wanted the people around him to help and save Matsumoto Kazuma and his brothers. "That's right, General, please act quickly. As long as you can save our captain and comrades, I'm willing to swear that I'll be loyal to Bugnam of Gojoseon for the rest of my life. Yu Suzuki also spoke. Compared to Chushiki, he was willing to swear his loyalty. Other than Kitamura, who was still recovering from his leg injury, Yu Suzuki and Chushiki, who hadn't fully recovered from their shoulder injuries, were also here. The reason why they were here was all because of Yang Chendong. Chapter 1094. The ambush at the foot of the mountain not only failed to kill Yang Chendong, but even Long Wei, who was beside him, was not killed. Only 2 of them were slightly injured. In exchange, 2 of the special ninjas were injured and 1 was captured. In the end, all 3 of them were captured alive. After the 3 of them were captured, Yang Chendong first handed them over to Beta Persei. He believed that with the interrogation and torture methods he and Beta Persei had learned, it wouldn't take long for the 3 of them to suffer a fate worse than death. They would forever regret the moment when they had the idea to attack him. But things were always unexpected. Princess Junko suddenly came to his door. After there was no one else in the tent, she knelt on the ground in front of Yang Chendong's puzzled eyes. She knelt in front of her husband. "Madam, why are you doing this?" Yang Chendong's eyes flashed with doubts. He thought that he knew this student whom he had known for several years very well, but at this moment, he was also stunned by Junko's sudden action. "King!" After hearing Yang Chendong's unique name, Junko slowly raised her head. "King, Junko begs you, don't kill those 3 people. They are the best talents of the Japanese Empire. They should be used by King, and they shouldn't die in silence like this." Junko actually wanted to save the 3 special ninjas, which was really beyond Yang Chendong's expectation. As far as he knew, when the Emperor was still in power, these special ninjas gave him a lot of problems, and he didn't even know how many times they had opposed him. They were supposed to be enemies, so why would she plead for mercy for the other party? Yang Chendong's doubts were seen by Junko, and she actually smiled and said, "King, Junko really hates them. But it's even more clear that they are just following orders. Junko's real enemy is Ashikaga Yoshimasa. In order to achieve this goal, other people can be used and cooperated with." She even said something like making use of him. It can be seen that she was indeed standing on Yang Chendong's side, and she even forgot her identity as the princess of the Japanese Empire. These days, with Junko's understanding of the 5-star army gradually deepened, especially after seeing the bravery of the 1st Cavalry Division, although she was unwilling, she had to make a judgment. The 5-star army was too strong. It was so strong that the disordered Japanese Empire couldn't stop it. If the Japanese Empire was truly unified in the hands of her father, with a strong military base, she would still fight against him. But now, the Neon people's minds were in chaos, and there was constant fighting among the higher-ups. More than half of their strength had been consumed, and now Neon was more fragile than ever. In the face of the powerful 5-star army, defeat was certain. It was just a matter of time. The result was already decided. Junko was a smart person. Since she was a little emperor, she had never done anything that went against the heavens. What she thought about was how to maximize the benefits, how to turn all the disadvantages into advantages. Even if she knew that the rise of the 5-star army was inevitable, how to preserve the strength of the Japanese Empire became something she must consider. Although she didn't dare to have extravagant hopes of reviving her country, she didn't dare to imagine that even if Yang Chendong had become her man. As a person who was born in a country where women's rights weren't valued, she had such thoughts and awareness since she was a child. It didn't matter if she couldn't revive her country, she didn't dare to force it. What she wanted was to leave more seeds for the Japanese Empire, leave more marks. At least, when people talked about it, the future generations would know that there was a Japanese Empire in the past, and that was enough. To achieve this goal, the spread of ninjas was undoubtedly the key. In a sense, when people talked about ninjas, they would naturally mention the Japanese Empire, and that was enough. In order to achieve this goal, the 3 special ninjas under the rock couldn't die. This was the reason why she came to see Yang Chendong, and she didn't hesitate to kneel down as soon as they met to achieve this goal. Junko opened her mouth to plead for mercy for the 3 special ninjas, which was somewhat beyond Yang Chendong's expectation. Confucius said that only villains and women were difficult to raise. One of the meanings was that women were often emotional creatures. Logic had little effect on them, and they were often more used to acting on their emotions. With this point in mind, Yang Chendong never thought that Junko would plead for mercy for any of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's subordinates. Even if the death of her father's family wasn't directly related to those people, there was always an indirect relationship. It would be good if she didn't come to beg him to kill all of them. How could she plead for mercy for them? Junko's abnormal behavior also attracted Yang Chendong's attention. He discovered that he had been underestimating this woman. She was really worthy of being born in the imperial family. Her behavior was really different from others. This move also successfully attracted Yang Chendong's attention. She was even willing to let go of her father's death. Such a woman really made people vigilant. "Madam Hachi, what are you doing? Do you want to use them for yourself?" Yang Chendong asked bluntly. Without any probing, he directly spoke out his thoughts. When the words came out, Junko's face suddenly stiffened. She knew that her behavior was misunderstood. She also knew that once Yang Chendong had a bad opinion of her, she was afraid that she would never be happy. Even if it was for herself, she had to explain clearly. "My king, I don't want to use them for myself. Since I gave you my body, I have paid all my feelings. I just want to be the 8th madam, and I don't have any thoughts or desires. If my king doesn't believe me, you can send someone to send me away now. I promise that I won't complain." Junko raised her head and looked at Yang Chendong with a very firm look, expressing her feelings. The two of them stared at each other in this way. At this moment, Yang Chendong seemed to be able to see Junko's heart through her eyes. This scene lasted for about 3 or 4 breaths of time. Finally, Yang Chendong took the lead to turn his head to the side. He didn't want to doubt Junko. He also liked this lovely but ill-fated girl. Whether it was out of pity or affection, he didn't want to give up on her so easily. Therefore, he didn't want to guess her real thoughts. "Well, I believe you for the time being. Then tell me, if you don't want to take them for your own use, what are you trying to do?" Yang Chendong asked. Facing this question, Junko was determined to be honest. She knew that there weren't many chances for her to explain. If she didn't seize this opportunity, she was afraid that she wouldn't have another chance to explain everything and tell her thoughts. "My king, Junko knows that this time, the Japanese Empire is doomed. Perhaps it won't be long before the Japanese Empire becomes a province under the 5-star army." Speaking of this, the corner of Junko's mouth couldn't help but twitch slightly. After all, the motherland was about to be destroyed, no one would be happy. But when she thought about how her parents and brother died in the hands of her own people, she thought that even if the Japanese Empire was powerful, it wouldn't be able to escape the sharp sword of the 5-star army. She quickly felt relieved and continued to say, "The Japanese Empire becoming a province under the 5-star army is a good thing for the people. Junko is happy for them." "Oh? You really think so?" Yang Chendong suddenly interrupted and asked. For Junko, who had already become his 8th wife, Yang Chendong didn't want to force her. But today, since they had talked like this, some questions that were usually difficult to ask could be asked clearly. He hoped that through today's conversation, they could completely eliminate the last barrier between them, and become a truly selfless husband and wife. "Yes," Junko said with a very firm tone. "The Japanese Empire becoming a province under the 5-star army is naturally a good thing for the people. They can forever avoid the flames of war, and live a peaceful and happy life. This is of course a good thing. It's a good thing for the people, but for the higher-ups of the Japanese Empire, it's not necessarily a good thing," Yang Chendong said again. At the same time, he stared closely at Junko, wanting to see her true thoughts. "That's right, it's not a good thing for the higher-ups. But the royal family has been destroyed, and for Junko, there are no higher-ups. Now, Junko is not a princess, but a commoner, the 8th wife of the king, that's all. Since she wants to be a wife, why does she still care about the ninjas?" Yang Qindong didn't believe Junko easily, especially this woman was a member of the royal family of the Japanese Empire. The shadow of the future was too big, and he didn't want the country that he worked so hard to build to be stolen by an outsider, even if that person was his wife. When it came to the main topic, Junko didn't have the slightest intention to hide, and took the initiative to explain. Junko just wants to leave a mark on the Japanese Empire, and at the same time, as a former princess, I want to do something for them. Besides, ninjas are a very strong force. In the past, when the emperor was still alive, he once said that ninjas have many branches, but because they can't unite together, they can't use their full strength. My king, if you want to conquer the world and create miracles in the end, wouldn't it be better to have as many strong helpers as possible? Since you can give a chance to the foreign cavalry on the grassland, why can't you give a chance to the ninjas? Junko said all the words in the bottom of her heart, and then looked at Yang Qindong intently. The look in her eyes was very strong. It was obvious that she hoped that Yang Qindong would agree, so that she could do something for the Japanese Empire and live up to her identity as a princess. Even if one day she went to the ground to see her father, she would have something to explain. Yang Qindong didn't answer immediately, but constantly analyzed the pros and cons in his heart. No one knew better than Yang Qindong what the Japanese Empire's people were like. When you were strong, they would kneel down and lick your boots. When you were weak, they would find all kinds of excuses to bully you. Chapter 1095. Yang Qindong didn't like such national characteristics, so he only thought of one way to deal with the so-called ninjas, which was to eliminate them. Completely eliminate them. As long as he killed all these ninjas, there would be no such title in the future. Only then could he rest assured and leave everything to his descendants. However, Junko's words were also not wrong. Why could he tolerate the grassland people joining the 5-star army, but not the ninjas? Since he knew that the people of the Japanese Empire respected the strong, as long as he was strong enough, he didn't need to worry about them rebelling against him one day. If he was really worried, he could just get rid of them after he conquered the world. Yang Qindong felt that he was in the wrong when dealing with other people, but when it came to the Japanese Empire, he didn't think that there was anything he couldn't do. After a full quarter of an hour of silence, Yang Qindong didn't say anything. Junko was waiting on the side, just like a suspect in a court of law, waiting for the final verdict. Finally, Yang Qindong opened his mouth and looked at Junko. I can agree to your request, but do you have a way to persuade them? This was equivalent to agreeing, so Junko was naturally happy. However, what she said next made Yang Qindong a little dumbfounded. My king, Junko doesn't know how to do it, but the omnipotent king will definitely think of a good way, right? There was no way to explain things, and all hope fell on himself. At this moment, Yang Qindong wanted to slap his forehead and sigh, but he didn't. As Junko said, he was the omnipotent king, of course, there was nothing that could be difficult for him. Well, if that's the case, I still need Madame's cooperation. You can do this. Yang Qindong quickly thought of a way. Although he couldn't guarantee that it would work, he didn't need these ninjas. With such a preconceived idea, it wasn't difficult to think of a plan. Yang Qindong's idea wasn't that brilliant, but it was very effective. First, he asked Junko to visit the 3 special ninjas as the princess of the Japanese Empire. She wanted to get closer to them, and at the same time, express her respect and love for them. During the contact, Junko represented Yang Qindong to express the importance of ninjas and promised to help them develop. After the implementation of the plan, sure enough, the performance of the 3 special ninjas was not as stubborn as before. As I said before, the growth process of a ninja is destined to not be able to distract their attention. They can't be too entangled with the secular world. They can only rely on other rich clans to grow up effectively. Considering that the training process is too long and requires more financial support, it effectively hinders the development of the ninja team. This was also the reason why they were under the control of Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Compared to the other forces, this general was very rich. He can only be regarded as very rich, but compared to Yang Qindong's wealth, he can't be compared to him. When Junko said that Bugnam of Gojoseon was willing to provide 5 million silver a year to support the training and development of the ninjas, the three were moved. With this money, they won't be disturbed by the secular world, and it won't be long before they can restore the glory of the ninja team. This was a proposal that they couldn't refuse. Of course, if they can be bought with money, then it would be too easy to deal with. In fact, it is precisely because they are not good at scheming, and it has been proven that people with distracting thoughts will not make any progress in their ninja training, so they are more honest and grateful than the average person. Considering that they have always received the kindness of the general, the three didn't immediately agree, but told Junko that they want to see Bugnam of Gojoseon before making a decision. This was within Yang Chendong's expectations. No matter how much a person dreamed, they had to learn to bow to reality. When Junko came and said that the 3 special ninjas wanted to see him, he didn't hesitate to agree. From the bottom of his heart, Yang Chendong is still very optimistic about the strength of the ninjas, because even in the future, the name of the ninjas is very famous, and they have become the spokesman of the military force of a certain island country. At that time, all kinds of high-tech weapons were rampant, but they still have such an influence. It can be seen that their background and lethality are powerful. If they can be subdued, then needless to say, they will be a big help. As for whether the people of the Japanese Empire are trustworthy, he naturally has confidence. After subduing them, they will not have a chance to rebel. This confidence comes not only from the wealth he has now, but also from his martial strength that has almost reached the level of a Grand Master. Grand Master. From ancient times to the present, it has been mentioned by many people, but there are not many people who have really reached this level of strength. Zhang Sanfeng, the founder of Wudong, is one person, and Yang Chendong undoubtedly has such strength. Even with the faint 5 stars in his body, he can go in and out at any time, which is to say, he has reached a realm where he can disappear into thin air. This is very mysterious, and Yang Chendong doesn't know why such a thing happened. Unable to understand, he could only attribute all this to luck. Perhaps God hoped that there would be such a person who could spread the spirit of Huaxia and unify the world. Unfortunately, this person had chosen him. In the big tent, Yang Chendong saw the 3 special ninjas under the rock. Among them, Kitamura was carried in a single stretcher. The 2 crossbow wounds on his legs were far from being able to recover in a short time. Fortunately, the treatment was timely, and after careful treatment, there shouldn't be any sequelae. Accompanying Yang Chendong were Junko and Beta Persei. In the face of the 3 special ninjas, 2 of whom have recovered all their strength, Yang Chendong can still face them calmly. From this point, one can see the strong confidence in his heart. At the foot of Littleine Mountain, Yang Chendong originally had the ability to take down the 3 people in a short time. If it weren't for the fact that he didn't know whether the other party had a backup plan, he wouldn't have given the other party so many opportunities to show off. Yang Chendong was calm, and even his sitting posture was very relaxed. However, Beta Persei, who was standing beside him, was very nervous. His right hand was already on the sword, and he looked like he was ready to attack at any time. He knew very well that at such a close distance, if something happened, he was afraid that he wouldn't even have a chance to shoot. That being the case, he might as well draw his sword. Since he was following the young master, and was responsible for his safety, Beta Persei was naturally very cautious. Outside the main tent, the 2 captains, Chiu Vi and Dao Xiao, each led 50 of the most elite Longwei to guard the tent. If there was any movement in the tent, they would immediately rush in. In this way, Beta Persei's nervousness and Yang Chendong's relaxation formed a sharp contrast. This was not only felt by Suzuki and Yui Suzuki, but also Junko, who didn't know any martial arts, could feel it. But she wasn't afraid at all, because Yang Chendong was by her side, and he was her king. As long as her king was there, she instinctively felt a strong sense of security. "You want to see me?" After a brief silence in the main tent, Yang Chendong was the first to break the silence. Yang Chendong spoke in fluent Japanese, which saved Junko the trouble of translating, and he could clearly express his attitude through his tone. Yes, we want to talk to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Suzuki took on the role of the main negotiator. Speaking of which, his language skills weren't that great, but compared to Yui Suzuki, who was even more taciturn, he was much better. Then let's talk, tell me your conditions and requests. Yang Chendong nodded lightly and said casually. But in fact, he was the one who took the initiative in the conversation. Yang Chendong intentionally gave the other party a chance to speak, and even put on a serious expression. Finally, after nearly an hour, the two sides finally reached an agreement under Yang Chendong's control. This content was also proposed by Yang Chendong. According to Suzuki's idea, they could join the 5-star army and complete some assassination missions that couldn't be exposed. But at the same time, they also put forward a request, which was the amount of rewards they could get for completing a mission, and how much training money Yang Chendong would give them every year. Regarding this, Yang Chendong directly shook his head and rejected. He didn't want a cooperative relationship, but a pure relationship of superior and subordinate. In other words, these ninjas could only have one master, and what they wanted to do in the future would be decided by that person, and that person was no doubt himself. Suzuki naturally wouldn't agree to this, and even Yui Suzuki, who had been silent all this time, also shook her head. But then Yang Chendong proposed a plan, and the two of them made the final concession. How about this? Let's make a bet. You promise this king one thing, and do it, then this king will bet that your Grand Admiral will make a move on Matsumoto Kazuma. If he doesn't, then not only will I give you 5 million silver, I will also send you safely away, and we will be even. Of course, if you lose, I will still give you the 5 million silver, but from then on, you must treat me as your master, and listen to my orders. How about it? Yang Chendong smiled as he gave a suggestion. When he finished, Suzuki and Yui Suzuki's eyes widened. It was just a bet, and no matter who won or lost, they would still get 5 million silver. That was 5 million silver, and once they got it, it would be enough to support their development for several years, and the ninja team would also welcome a brand new change, and a huge expansion. This kind of bet, as long as one wasn't an idiot, they wouldn't refuse. Okay, we agree. Just by looking at each other, Yui Suzuki could tell that Yui Suzuki was just as tempted as he was, so he agreed on behalf of both of them. Chapter 1096. Just like that, the bet was made. Yang Chendong also told them what he wanted them to do, which was to publicly announce that their assassination attempt on Yang Chendong was ordered by the great general Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and announce it to the entire Japanese Empire. Just this? Chushiki asked in disbelief. Yes. Yang Chendong gave a very certain answer. Originally, the three of them came to assassinate Yang Chendong because of the great general's order, and they didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. Furthermore, they were all enemies, so wasn't it normal for them to try to kill each other? They were just telling the truth, so it wasn't a big deal. Therefore, they would be able to get 5 million in funding for the development of the ninjas. No matter how they looked at it, it was a profit. Chushiki and Yui Suzuki didn't have any reason to refuse, so they agreed immediately. Seeing the two of them agree so quickly, Yang Chendong couldn't help but smirk. He knew that he wasn't far from conquering this powerful ninja force. Because he knew what kind of consequences would come after this matter was announced to the world. Ashikaga Yoshimasa wasn't just a simple martial artist, he was also a political strategist. Even if some things were true, they couldn't be publicly announced. On this point, Yang Chendong and Ashikaga Yoshimasa had the same idea. Chushiki and Yui Suzuki, on the other hand, were too naive, and they would eventually take the initiative to become Yang Chendong's subordinates. The facts also proved that Yang Chendong's idea was correct. When Chushi and Yui Suzuki suddenly appeared in public and pointed out the fact that they were ordered by the great general to assassinate Emperor Wu Nan of the Ming dynasty. Unfortunately, they didn't succeed. The Lu 4th Division and the Lu 7th Division, who had already arrived at Neon, cooperated with each other and launched an attack on the nearby Ping'an capital from the Sanyang Sect's Bomo area. The 100mm mortars that had been prepared beforehand were fired like raindrops, and they instantly destroyed the first line of defense set up by the great general. The 30,000 Japanese army didn't even see the shadow of the 5-star army, and thousands of people were killed or injured, and then they hurriedly retreated. When the news reached Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was still occupying the flat well field in the Hokuriku, he was furious. Seeing that the largest resistance force in the country was about to be annihilated, the sudden change in the situation in the south caught him off guard. According to the report of the scouts, the 5-star army's attack is very fierce, especially their artillery. How can he defend against an enemy that he can't even see? Under this situation, not only will the 50,000 Japanese Empire's garrison not be able to stop the 5-star army's attack, but the Japanese Empire's capital, Ping and Beijing, will also be lost. And all of this was caused by the words of the ninja, which directly tore up the agreement between the two sides. At this moment, the great general hated the ninja to the core. At this time, the samurai captain Yamaguchi Fukada stood up and said that the ninja should be taught a lesson, and let others know what the consequences of betraying the great general are. Regarding this, Ashikaga Yoshimasa also nodded in agreement. He also needed a way to vent his anger, and Matsumoto Kazuma was undoubtedly the vent. That's why Yamaguchi Fukada appeared in the ninja compound with 200 elite samurai and Matsumoto Fuma. That's why the ninjas resisted and Matsumoto Fuma went all out. Yang Qindong had long expected that Ashikaga Yoshimasa wouldn't tolerate the betrayal of his subordinates, so he arranged for Tai Hu and Bai Zhua, the two captains of Wolf Fang and Ghost Shadow, to sneak into Ping and Beijing to rescue Matsumoto Kazuma. According to the information obtained from the intelligence department, Matsumoto Kazuma was different from the 3 special ninjas under the rock. This person had some tricks up his sleeve. If this kind of person was used well, it would naturally save a lot of effort, but if it wasn't used well, he would become a poisonous snake that could bite at any time. Then how to subdue Matsumoto Kazuma would require some brains. At least it wouldn't be as simple as dealing with the 3 special ninjas under the rock. This was the reason why Tai Hu and Bai Zhua didn't immediately act when they saw the samurai make a move. These 2 captains weren't in a hurry because they had already received orders from the 6th young master. However, Suzuki and Hayashikaga couldn't do it. Seeing their commander Matsumoto Kazuma fighting with his life on the line and bleeding profusely, they couldn't bear it, and kept begging Tai Hu and Hayashikaga. They even swore an oath to be loyal to Bugnam of Gojoseon for generations. Whether it was Suzuki or Hayashikaga, they didn't expect that they would lose the bet. The assassination was originally the Supreme General's order, and they were just executing it. In any case, they were already enemies, so it wasn't a big deal to tell the truth. They really didn't think that Ashikaga Yoshimasa would make a move on Matsumoto Kazuma because of this. Isn't this kind of internal strife destroying one's own strength and raising the prestige of others? But regardless of whether they could think it through or not, it really happened. Now they didn't have time to think too much, they just wanted to save Matsumoto Kazuma and save more ninjas. Matsumoto Kazuma was already an arrow at the end of its flight, and he was fighting with all his life's potential. Tai Hu and Bai Zhua naturally saw this scene clearly. After hearing Hayashikaga's words of loyalty, and thinking that they had completed the 6th young master's mission, they finally decided to stop watching and make a move. After all, they still have a mission to save Matsumoto Kazuma and more ninjas, otherwise, if they die, the meaning of their presence here will be a lot smaller. Sniper, aim at the target and prepare to shoot. Langya, prepare to engage the enemy in close combat, and at the same time prepare the medicine. The 2 captains prepared to shoot at the same time. In the courtyard, Matsumoto Kazuma was still desperately trying to stab with his sword. Because the wound on his abdomen was bleeding a lot, he knew that he was going to die here today. Knowing that he was going to die, he wasn't so afraid, he just wanted to kill a few more people before he died, and it can be regarded as revenge for his brothers. Yamaguchi Fukada was watching from the side, he didn't choose to fight with Matsumoto Kazuma. In his view, a dying man is still likely to have great potential. What he needs to do is to wait for the other side to continue to consume his strength, and when he completely has no power to resist, he will kill him to show his strength. Yamaguchi Fukada didn't make a move, which created enough opportunity for Iron Tiger and the others to save Matsumoto Kazuma. In the mainland, more and more ninjas died, and when the situation was about to be settled, suddenly, on the roof of the courtyard, several archers tilted their bodies and rolled down from the courtyard wall. The sudden scene made many people very puzzled. What made them even more puzzled was that in just a few breaths of time, close to 10 more master archers threw down the bows that they relied on for survival and laid flat on the roof. No matter how others called out to them, they didn't respond at all. This is clearly the symptom of a person dying. For a time, the other archers also felt that they were in danger. The snipers in the dark continued to shoot, but in front of the archers who were on guard, they were no longer as accurate as before. Everyone was a long-range fighter, and they had a natural sense of danger. After several archers dodged the bullets, they finally found that the situation was not right. Not good, there are assassins in the dark, and they are very likely to be using weapons similar to firearms. After the captain of the archers dodged a fatal shot, he saw a small hole in the place where he was originally standing, and immediately said with a nervous face, hide in a safe place." The captain of the team finally spoke, and more than 100 archers hurriedly dodged in all directions, each looking for a safe place. "We've been discovered, let's just rush in," Captain Baizwa said with some reluctance. But archers were archers, and that kind of perception of danger was innate. He didn't expect to be able to eliminate all of them. As long as they could scare them, or even make them retreat, they would be able to save most of the ninjas. Chapter 1097. As soon as they saw Yang Qindong, Trishi and Yui Suzuki knelt on the ground. They had already heard from Tai Hu and Baizwa that this kind of person who needed treatment due to excessive bleeding could only be treated by the 6th young master and his designated medical team. Although they didn't know what method would be used, they knew that it would cost a lot. The ninjas weren't completely accepted by the 5-star army yet, and they didn't know if the 6th young master would care about them or not. At this moment, they could only kneel and beg for mercy, hoping that Bugnam of Gojoseon would help. Their request was naturally accepted. Since Yang Qindong was determined to subdue the ninjas for his own use, how could he watch something happen to Matsumoto Kazuma, a core member of the ninjas? "Come, send him to the field hospital. Tell them what I said, no matter the cost, they must save him." The first Longway's Captain Chiovi hurriedly nodded and led his men to take over the stretcher. Trishi and Yui Suzuki were left behind. They looked at Yang Qindong with gratitude and knelt on the ground again. The person was sent away for treatment, but most of the ninjas didn't think that Matsumoto Kazuma could be saved. They saw with their own eyes how much blood was flowing out of his body, and how pale and ugly his complexion was. Under their old thinking, they believed that a person's blood was limited. Since so much had been lost, no matter what methods they used, they would not be able to reverse the situation. Didn't they hear Bugnam of Gojoseon say that they must do their best to save him? Didn't he say that he would definitely be cured? There were a lot of ninjas who thought this, and the number was not small. When Trishi heard these words, he couldn't help but stare back angrily. "You have to believe in Bugnam of Gojoseon, and you have to believe that Kun Matsumoto has the strongest will in the world. He will definitely be able to survive." Although he said this, in fact, Trishi didn't believe that Matsumoto Kazuma would really be fine. He was just doing his best and leaving the rest to fate. For the whole afternoon, nearly 100 ninjas rested in several large tents arranged for them. They were all extremely quiet. This was related to the boring life they had since childhood, and they were also worried about Matsumoto Kazuma's health. For a long time, Matsumoto Kazuma was their leader. No matter what happened, everyone was used to listening to his orders. Now that there was a problem, it was no wonder that everyone was so sad. Some people didn't even know how to face the future. Time passed little by little, the sky gradually darkened, and finally there was movement outside the big tent. Ninja's perception is very strong. As soon as they heard footsteps coming, they walked out of the big tent without anyone calling them. With the help of the torches next to the barracks, they saw that the person who came was a seemingly high-level guard who followed Bugnam of Gojoseon during the day. The person who came was tall and his voice was like thunder. After noticing that all the ninjas, even some of the wounded who were covered with gauze, involuntarily walked out of the big tent, he nodded with satisfaction. This saved him the trouble of notifying them one by one. "Hello everyone, my name is Beta Persei. I am Bugnam of Gojoseon's personal guard. I am here on behalf of Bugnam of Gojoseon to inform you that Matsumoto Kazuma has passed the critical period and is fine." "Where? Really?" After a moment, the ninjas who reacted suddenly became lively. Many of them had a look of joy on their faces, and some of them showed a look of disbelief. For example, Bloishida was one of them. "Beta Persei-kun, is Kun Matsumoto really okay?" "Yes," Beta Persei replied with a very positive tone. "Then can we go and see him?" Yui Suzuki asked anxiously. "Yes, but after all, his body hasn't fully recovered, so we can't send too many people at once. You can send 2 representatives to see him first." Beta Persei also knew that if he didn't let people see him, not many people would believe him. The 2 representatives were naturally Bloishida and Suzuki Yu. They represented nearly 100 ninjas and followed Beta Persei to the temporary battlefield hospital. There, they saw Matsumoto Kazuma lying on the bed. His face had recovered a lot of color, but he could only lie down. "Kun Matsumoto!" Bloishida and Suzuki Yu almost cried at the same time, and said with a somewhat choked voice, "Hee, you're here." After seeing his 2 companions, Matsumoto Kazuma forced a smile, and then wanted to sit up on the bed, but he inadvertently pulled the wound on his abdomen that was just stitched, and he couldn't help but grin. All of this was seen by Bloishida and Suzuki Yu, and they quickly stepped forward to help him. Looking at all of this, Beta Persei knew that it was time for him to leave. He said that the visiting time can't be too long, and the patient still needs to rest, then he left first. When only Matsumoto Kazuma and the other 2 were left in the tent, it suddenly became very quiet. The 3 of them closed their eyes and did the same thing. This wasn't praying, but sensing. They were sensing the surrounding environment to decide if they could talk about something here. Soon, the 3 of them opened their eyes and nodded to each other. After ensuring that the environment was safe, Matsumoto Kazuma, who was lying on the bed, was the first to ask, "Why am I here? Why are you here?" Because of the lag in the news, Matsumoto Kazuma still didn't know that the 3 of them failed their mission and were captured by Yang Chendong, and were used as an excuse to deal with the Supreme Generalissimo. Right now, Matsumoto Kazuma's mind was still stuck in the scene where he fought with the samurai. "Kun Matsumoto, the situation is like this." Bloishida, who was quite eloquent, told him how the 3 of them failed their mission and were captured, and how they reached an agreement with Yang Chendong. Finally, they went to the ninja compound with the elites of the 5-star army to rescue the 3 of them. Matsumoto Kazuma listened carefully at first, but when he heard that the 3 of them were captured, he was surprised. When he heard that he reached an agreement with Bugnam of Gojoseon, he was worried that they would be used. After hearing everything, he finally understood why the Supreme Generalissimo sent Yamaguchi Fukada to attack him with elite samurai and 200 sharpshooters. Matsumoto Kazuma was in charge of the external affairs of the ninja compound, so his understanding of the human heart was much better than Bloishida and Yui Suzuki. Yang Chendong's bet was a conspiracy in his eyes, and it was proven that all of this was beneficial to the development of the 5-star army. Obviously, Matsumoto Kazuma knew everything, but he couldn't say anything. Blame them? He didn't kill the captives, but he respected them and gave them a chance to choose. That was already very benevolent. At least from Matsumoto Kazuma's point of view, if he was in their shoes, he wouldn't let the person who tried to assassinate him live. Also, Yang Chendong only made a simple plan, and the one who really fell for it was the Supreme Generalissimo. If he didn't think of himself as a cautious person, if he trusted him a little more, this kind of fratricide wouldn't have happened. From this matter, it can be seen that everyone didn't trust each other. Under such a foundation, even if the fratricide didn't happen today, it might happen in the future. Sigh. With a long sigh, Matsumoto Kazuma knew that he lost, and lost completely. Now that the other party saved his life and gave him a new lease of life, he didn't seem to have any choice in the future. One was his old boss, who wanted to kill him. The other was his new boss, who not only saved his life, but also gave him a place to live and a new hope. What choice to make? He should know how to make a decision. But before that, he still hoped to know more about Bugnam of Gojoseon, so that he can get more benefits for himself in the future. Bloishida, Suzuki-kun, you've all seen Bugnam of Gojoseon. Tell me about your impression and understanding of him. In the main tent 2 miles away, Beta Persei stood in front of Yang Chendong and handed over the task. Then he asked with a puzzled look, "Young master, why don't you let me stay and listen to what they say? I'm sure I won't be discovered by them." "Oh, do you think that ninja's perception is just for show? I can guarantee that before you get close to the big tent, you will be discovered," Yang Chendong said with a smile. Ninjas are best at sneaky assassinations. The feeling that they can appear at any time is very annoying, making people unable to guard against them. The reason is their perception of the environment. It is precisely because of this instinct that they can avoid all kinds of warnings and appear next to the target without making a sound. Being looked down upon by the young master, Beta Persei was a little unconvinced. "Young master, so we just let them be? What if they don't abide by the rules and don't do it according to the bet, and want to leave or assassinate you again?" "They won't." Yang Chendong's answer was firm. "In this world, I'm afraid that there are few people who know more about the ninja industry than him. It is precisely because they do what they say, because of this simplicity, that they can persist in training in a boring environment, and thus become a terrifying existence. On the contrary, if they have other ideas in their hearts and there are too many conspiracy elements, then they won't have their current achievements." Because of this understanding, Yang Chendong believes that the date of his conversation with Matsumoto Kazuma is not far away. Early the next morning, as soon as Yang Chendong had breakfast, Captain Chiovi came to the main tent and reported to him that Matsumoto Kazuma wanted to meet. "Is it that urgent?" Yang Chendong smiled after listening, then said to Chiovi, "Let's go, accompany me to patrol inside and outside the barracks." Chapter 1098. Yang Chendong wanted to see Matsumoto Kazuma, but he couldn't be in a hurry. "I can't just go and see you when you want to see me. Wouldn't that be too tasteless?" He was now the great Ming prince. How high was his status? How could anyone see him just because they wanted to? Besides, at this time, the appropriate control will also play a positive role in conquering the ninja team, so why not? Yang Chendong was not in a hurry, but the one who was anxious was Matsumoto Kazuma. Seeing that it was already noon, and he had even finished eating lunch, but he still didn't see Yang Chendong's figure, he became somewhat anxious. Originally, he was anxious to see Yang Chendong because he wanted to express his attitude. That was, he was willing to accept his loss. Even if he wasn't present when the bet was made, he was still willing to accept everything. But as compensation, he also had to put forward some conditions to fight for more benefits for the ninja team. Matsumoto Kazuma was very confident that Yang Chendong would agree to some of his conditions. This could be seen from the fact that the other party didn't kill the 3 ninjas under the rock. Instead, he arranged for elite forces. Now, he even put in a lot of effort to save him. Since the other party valued him so much, if he didn't take the opportunity to put forward some conditions, wouldn't it be a waste of this opportunity? But after not seeing Yang Chendong's figure for a long time, his originally confident heart became somewhat uncertain. That is ninja really that important? At least for the leader of the 5-star army, the Ming dynasty's Bugnam of Gojoseon, is it really that important? Until the afternoon passed, Matsumoto Kazuma's original confidence was worn down by more than half. When it was time to eat dinner, there was still no news. He even began to doubt his own importance. It was also at this time that dense footsteps came from outside the big tent. Then the curtain of the big tent opened from the outside. A tall figure took the lead to enter, bringing a lot of pressure to Matsumoto Kazuma. The first to enter was Beta Persei. He first looked around, then looked at Matsumoto Kazuma lying on the bed. After he didn't find anything unusual, he nodded with satisfaction. He turned around and respectfully said, "Young master, everything is normal." After his voice fell, Yang Chendong appeared in front of Matsumoto Kazuma with a confident smile. Although he has heard about him for a long time, this is the first time he saw King Wunan of Damyang. Matsumoto Kazuma carefully observed the other party and found that the other party has a trace of a superior aura. The most important thing is that the confidence in his body seems to be able to infect others, giving people a sense of omnipotence. "Matsumoto, don't you know how to kneel when you see Budnam of Gojoseon?" Beta Persei noticed that this person only stared at the young master at this moment, and didn't do anything else. He suddenly shouted angrily, and this shout also pulled the other party's thoughts back to reality. "Matsumoto Kazuma greets Budnam of Gojoseon." As he spoke, he wanted to get out of bed and salute. "Forget it, you still have injuries on your body, just sit and talk." Yang Chendong casually waved his arm, but it was this movement that seemed to have some kind of magical power, making Matsumoto Kazuma, who wanted to get up, stop and involuntarily say, "Thank you?" "You don't have to thank me. I saved you because I don't want to see a talent fall. Also, this king's time is limited. I only have the time for an incense stick to burn to listen to you. I have other military affairs to attend to in a while." Yang Chendong sat down in front of the chair that Beta Persei had brought over. Chiovi behind him also took out an incense stick, lit it and stuck it in the ground, using facts to tell some people that they really only had the time for an incense stick to burn. Such anxiety and such an attitude, for a moment, Matsumoto Kazuma, who had a stomach full of words, suddenly didn't know what to say. He wanted to say too much, and it was far from being able to express clearly in an incense stick's time. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to play a very important role. If he can't explain his importance, then how can he make conditions? After waiting for a whole day, Matsumoto Kazuma really thought that Yang Chendong was very busy. If he missed today's negotiation, who knows when the next negotiation will be? He and his ninjas can't just wait like this. "I have to give in." The facts made Matsumoto Kazuma quickly make a decision. Since time is limited, he can only seize the time to make demands. In order to reach an agreement in a limited time, he has to constantly give in and give up benefits. "Budnam of Gojoseon, Chushiki-kun and Suzuki-kun said that you are willing to support the development and growth of our ninja training team, right?" With a hint of probing tone, he said. Although this was originally a fact, he had seen many people who renege on their debts, not to mention that if Yang Chendong admitted it, then it would be a large expenditure of 5 million silver coins. "That's right." Matsumoto Kazuma still wanted to probe, but Yang Chendong had already openly admitted it. After getting an accurate answer, Matsumoto Kazuma was very happy in his heart. Once there is an injection of 5 million silver coins, it is equivalent to having a great financial power. Whether it is high-intensity training or recruiting suitable seedlings, it will not be a problem. But just as this smile hung on his face, Yang Chendong also opened his mouth and said, "The promised 5 million silver coins will not be given to you all at once. In the beginning, I will give you 1 million silver coins, and then it will be paid in 5 batches within 3 years. During this period, if you complete the task given by this king, there will be additional rewards, but if the task is not completed well, or if you are disobedient, then your silver coins will be deducted. Do you agree?" This. He didn't expect there to be such an additional condition, but Chushiki-kun didn't say anything before. After being stunned for a moment, Matsumoto Kazuma felt relieved. Now he was at the chopping block, and he was the meat on the chopping block. What should he do? Shouldn't it be up to him? At least he didn't deny the 5 million silver coins. This result already made him very satisfied. The time it takes for a stick of incense to burn quickly passed. Yang Chendong did as he said and got up to leave, leaving Matsumoto Kazuma alone on the bed. He was still thinking about what Yang Chendong had said. Arrange a suitable training ground, provide food and gold. Of course, the food will be converted into silver coins and deducted from the 5 million silver coins. In addition, when there is a task to be given, the ninja team must carry it out to the letter. If they succeed, there will be rewards, and if they fail, there will be punishment. All of this was different from what Matsumoto Kazuma had imagined. He wanted to fight for a year without missions to restore the ninja team's strength, but now it seems that he didn't have the opportunity to raise the conditions, and he didn't have the ability to do so. Fortunately, Yang Chendong did what he said. Before he left hundreds of banknotes, which added up to exactly 1 million silver coins. Holding these in his hands, Matsumoto Kazuma felt a sense of security in his heart. Yang Chendong put aside the matter of the ninja team. He had done what he should do, and the next development would depend on the ability of the other party. Now his main energy was focused on conquering Ping and Beijing. He wanted to take advantage of the time when Ashikaga Yoshimasa was focusing on conquering the Northern Land Road. Ping and Beijing was not only a simple region, it was also the capital of the Japanese Empire, and the political and economic center of the country. Of course, at this time, the Japanese Empire didn't have its own unique culture. Once this place was conquered, it would represent the orthodoxy in a way. In addition, Junko was the princess of the Japanese Empire. When the time came, there would be a lot of people responding to her call, and it would be much easier to deal with Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was being thought of, did not look good. Standing in front of him was Yamaguchi Fukada, whose face was full of shame. This time, he didn't complete the task well, and didn't bring back Matsumoto Kazuma's body. Afraid of being punished, he kept his head down after entering the room, and didn't dare to raise it again. "Get out, 20 strokes of the cane." A cold voice came out of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's mouth. Yamaguchi Fukada breathed a sigh of relief in his heart, and turned to receive his punishment without saying a word. He knew the general's temper. If things went wrong, it was normal for him to be beheaded. This time, 20 strokes of the cane was the lowest punishment. This was not because Ashikaga Yoshimasa had a good temper, but because he was in need of manpower, especially since the ninja team could no longer be used, and the samurai team was abandoned. The number of cards in his hand would only decrease. Yamaguchi Fukada had already rolled out, but Yoshimasa's face still didn't look too good. Originally, he wanted to capture Matsumoto Fujina alive, or at least get his body, and then hand it over to the Pentastar army to get himself out of this matter. But now, it seemed that this trump card was gone. He slowly raised his head and fell on the other person in the room. Nin Shijuin, without Matsumoto Kazuma, the negotiation won't be a big problem, right? Nin Shijuin was sitting in the room. When he learned that the 5-star army suddenly tore up the agreement and invaded Ping and Beijing, he urgently summoned this person, and wanted to reopen the negotiation and stabilize the 5-star army first. But who would have thought that the bargaining chip in his hand was gone, and all hope could only be placed on Nin Shijuin's silver tongue? Nin Shijuin, who was asked this question, frowned first. At this moment, he was a little angry in his heart. He had spent a lot of effort to suppress the 5-star army through negotiations. He had even paid the price of the entire Shanyang path for this. But now, everything was destroyed because of the general's actions. Since he was the one who destroyed the negotiation first, it was no wonder that the 5-star army suddenly attacked. Under the current situation, it was very difficult to stop the 5-star army. Ashikaga Yoshimasa did not immediately answer this question. He knew that Nin Shijuin had an idea, so he immediately said, "Yamaguchi-kun just said that Matsumoto Kazuma lost too much blood, and I'm afraid that he is already dead. It shouldn't be too difficult to put all the blame on a dead person.